Chapter 384. I looked at President Gu and couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. When I first met him at the Metaphysics Association's headquarters, he stood on the high platform and looked at us young people with the eyes of an old senior. At that time, he was like a tall mountain that stood in front of me. I couldn't even see where the mountain was, and I didn't dare to have the thought of standing shoulder to shoulder with him. But now, everything seemed to be different. Looking at the restlessness and shock in President Gu's eyes, I suddenly felt that the Celestial Master wasn't so high and mighty. In the metaphysics world, the Celestial Master didn't just represent a high cultivation, but also an identity that transcended ordinary people. The specific manifestation of this identity was a bit vulgar. Celestial Master could fly. This fly wasn't just a metaphor, but a real ability. I had experienced it personally when Yen Nanshan's Yang God took me dozens of meters into the sky to avoid the sacrificial evil spirit. When a person could fly in the sky, perhaps they couldn't simply be called a person anymore. Thus, the meaning of the Celestial Master completely transcended itself, and represented a special meaning. Although my cultivation is still far from that of a Celestial Master, at the very least, I seem to be able to see that mountain peak. Moreover, I also have the courage to climb that mountain peak in my heart. As I thought about these questions, I smiled at President Gu and didn't say anything. I turned and walked towards Nangong and Zhang Kanwen. Perhaps it was because the method I used to kill Lu Ziang was too cruel, but Zhang Kanwen looked at me with a blank gaze when he saw me walking over. Zhang Kanwen knew the cause of my parents' death, so I didn't mention it again. I directly said to Nangong, "There's a hole in the ground over there. We should be able to leave this place after jumping in. Your cultivation hasn't recovered yet. The little zombie and I can take the two of you away." Nangong obviously didn't care about the method I used to kill Lu Ziang. He only smiled and didn't reply. Instead, he asked, "Have you decided to let those Celestial Masters go?" I nodded. Although the entire metaphysics world was my enemy, it was just like what Lu Ziang had said. In reality, there wasn't a force that would chase after me relentlessly. Whether it was the old president or Celestial Master Zhang, they were both things that I had to consider. If I really went on a killing spree with their cultivation, there was no way they wouldn't be able to find out. At that time, if the two of them wanted to kill me, I might really die without a burial place. Nangong smiled again. It was obvious that he wasn't surprised by my decision. Since we've decided to let them go, there's no point in staying here. You guys can leave now. I can't leave for the time being. I was stunned. Why? Nangong shook his head and said, "When I first came in, I said that I came here to find something, but I haven't found it yet. But you've lost all of your cultivation. If you stay here..." Halfway through my sentence, I saw the mysterious smile on Nangong's face and suddenly came to a realization. Could it be that your cultivation has recovered? Nangong nodded noncommittally. I haven't fully recovered yet, but I should be able to protect myself. His answer shocked me. The seal that the Metaphysics Association had placed on him was completely different from mine. The seal that I had placed on him was something that a Celestial Master had casually placed on him, while the seal that he had placed on him was something that the old president had personally instructed him to do. I couldn't help but look at him in shock. Nangong's cultivation wasn't as simple as that of an ordinary Celestial Master if he could break the seal that the old president had personally instructed him to do. Although I was shocked, this guy's whereabouts had always been secretive. I wasn't surprised that he wanted to stay here. Moreover, his cultivation had recovered, so I didn't have anything to worry about. I nodded and simply asked if he needed us to wait for him outside. After getting a negative answer, I called the little zombie and Zhang Kanwen to leave. However, I couldn't make up my mind when I saw the woman standing next to Zhang Kanwen. Should I take her with me? She looked exactly like Yi Pianpian and was said to be the key. If I wanted to clear up my doubts, taking her with me would be the best choice. However, I was hesitant. Just now, Mount Longhu and the Taoist Association had used up 20 years of their lifespan to snatch this woman. The other side had even taken out the Celestial Master Sword. This showed how precious this woman was. The appearance of the Celestial Master Sword meant that Celestial Master Zhang was behind their actions. If I took this woman with me, wouldn't I offend Celestial Master Zhang? While I was pondering, Nangong seemed to have noticed my hesitation. Do you want to take her with you? I didn't hide anything from him, so I didn't say anything and just nodded. Nangong shook his head. If you want to take her with you, why don't you go there and kill all the Celestial Masters? I was bewildered as I couldn't think of a reason. Nangong didn't wait for me to think and continued. This woman is very important to Mount Longhu. She's much more important than the 3 Celestial Masters. I understood now. He was worried about Mount Longhu's attitude, just like what I had been worried about. After a moment of silence, I sighed and decided to give up. Mount Longhu's power wasn't ordinary. I didn't need to make myself an enemy. Moreover, I had just killed Lu Ziang. According to Lu Ziang, from now on, the Lu family wouldn't rest until I was dead. If I had to face the Lu family's crazy revenge and Mount Longhu's enmity, I wouldn't have a chance to live. Nangong heaved a sigh of relief after seeing that I had made a rational decision. He didn't say anything else and just urged me to leave. I carried Zhang Kanwen on my back and called the little zombie. I wanted to leave immediately. However, after I had taken a few steps with Zhang Kanwen on my back, the little zombie didn't follow me. I felt strange. I turned around and saw the little zombie standing behind me. He was looking at something in his hand. It seemed he hadn't heard me. Was it possible that the battle between the Celestial Masters and the evil sacrificial spirits had affected the little zombie? With this thought, my heart tightened. Although the little zombie had always been quiet, I had been with him for a long time. He was like a family member to me. What's wrong with you? I asked as I turned around and walked back to him. The little zombie didn't answer me. He didn't even lift his head. He was still looking at his hands. When I came closer, I saw that he was holding a stone. I wasn't a stranger to this stone. It was the one Zhang Kanwen had given me to deal with the evil sacrificial spirit. However, after killing the evil sacrificial spirit, the stone had shrunk to the size of a fist. But now, the stone in the little zombie's hand was only the size of a thumb. I didn't understand, so I put Zhang Kanwen down. I wanted to take the stone to study it. However, in just a few seconds the stone had changed again. It had shrunk to the size of a grain of rice. It was about the same size as when Zhang Kanwen had given it to me. The little zombie's strange behavior and the stone's change made me a little nervous. I didn't dare to take it directly. I decided to observe it for a while. After half a minute, the grain-sized stone had shrunk until it disappeared from the little zombie's hand. What's going on? Before I could figure it out, the little zombie seemed to wake up from his bewildered state. He lifted his head and gazed at me with his big eyes. It was a strange feeling. The little zombie also had a pair of big eyes, but they weren't as big as they were right now. Moreover, the way he looked at me was strange. It was as if he had become a different person. I stared at him for a few seconds. The strange feeling disappeared, and a sense of familiarity emerged. It wasn't because I was familiar with the little zombie, but because his 2 big eyes reminded me of the evil sacrificial spirit. Chapter 385. I couldn't help but shiver. I carefully looked at the little zombie's eyes. The feeling of seeing an evil sacrificial spirit was gone. The little zombie's eyes seemed to have shrunk and returned to their original size. Could it be that I'm hallucinating? I hesitated for a while and stared at the little zombie for a while. I didn't have that feeling again. I shook my head and confirmed that it was just a hallucination. Why didn't you respond when I called you? The little zombie blankly looked at me as if he didn't understand what I meant. From the first time I had met this kid until now, he had been bewildered. I had asked him twice, but he didn't answer me. Feeling helpless, I had to give up and take him out of this place. I asked him to follow me. This time, the little zombie nodded and followed me. We walked toward the hole on the ground. When I reached the entrance of the cave, Nangong told me that when I reached the door that I had entered from, I only needed to hold the shell coin that I had found earlier in my hand and infuse it with my witchcraft energy. Then, I would be able to walk out of the invisible door. I nodded and said goodbye to Nangong. Then, I held Zhang Kanwen and jumped down from the hole. At this moment, my cultivation had already completely recovered. It wasn't difficult for me to jump a few meters down. After the little zombie and I landed on the ground, I turned around and waved at Nangong, who was standing at the entrance of the cave, before stepping on the path back to the cave. The doors of the sacrificial hall were still open. We didn't have to worry about getting out of the hall quickly. After we got out of the hall, I turned around to check. My heart was still restless. Too many things had happened in this ancient sacrificial hall during the past day. Han Wunan had plotted against them. The Metaphysics Society had captured them. Lu Zhenyang had ambushed them. Han Wunan and Lu Zhenyang had become the sacrificial offerings for the blood sacrifice cave. They had met the woman who looked exactly like Yi Pianpian. They had witnessed a terrifying battle and killed the evil sacrificial spirit. Then, they had killed Lu Zhenyang to take revenge for their parent. I didn't have time to think about all the things that had happened one after another. When I got out of the mysterious ancient sacrificial hall, I couldn't help but sigh. Of course, it wasn't the time to sigh. Zhang Kanwen was still badly injured, and there might be other unknown things in the mysterious tomb of the Shang dynasty. I couldn't stay here any longer. It was better to get out of here. After asking Zhang Kanwen and confirming that my fast movement wouldn't affect his wounds, I sped up. In less than half of the time it took me to arrive at the entrance of the sacrificial hall, I pushed the door open just like last time and arrived in front of the long stone path. When I arrived here, I immediately remembered the murals. However, it was strange that I couldn't find any murals on the square stones. There wasn't even a trace of them. I gawked. I didn't know if I had seen it wrong before or now. Luckily, I still had some photos on my phone. I took them out and checked. The photos hadn't disappeared. I could confirm that the murals I had seen earlier were real. Nangong had said that there was something important hidden in the mural. I had planned to take a few clearer pictures on the way back, but now it seemed that I wouldn't be able to. Although I didn't take any more pictures, I was now even more certain that there was something hidden in the murals. Walking along the stone path, I quickly reached the place where we had first arrived. It was pitch black, exactly the same as when I had arrived. I followed Nangong's instructions and easily guided my shaman energy into the shell coin. Then my eyes brightened. When I opened them again, I was already in the ruins of the Shang dynasty's royal tomb. In the absolute darkness of the royal tomb, I didn't have any concept of time. I didn't know how much time had passed outside. However, from the looks of it, it should be daytime outside. There were 4 people standing in front of me. 2 of them were wearing staff uniforms. They should be the staff of the ruins of the Shang dynasty's royal tomb. The other 2 looked like tourists. The 4 of them opened their eyes wide as if they had seen a ghost. They stared at us. It was an unspoken rule that the metaphysical world didn't want to affect the secular world. I waved my hand, and a wisp of shaman energy appeared out of thin air. It divided into 4 parts and surged towards the 4 people. As I quickly chanted, a spell was attached to the shaman's aura. Very quickly, it entered the eyes of the 4 people and disappeared. Immediately after, the 4 people closed their eyes and fainted. Only then did I hastily leave. The spell I had just used was a low-power spell that could cause amnesia. It simply erased their memories for half an hour. It wouldn't cause any harm to them. If there were 4 people in the deepest part of the royal tomb, there would only be more people in other places. I didn't dare to delay any longer. I used my fastest speed to rush out and return to the surface. Then, I hurried back to the hotel that I had stayed in previously. Many people saw me during this process. However, with my speed, they only saw an afterimage. In the end, they would think that their eyes were playing tricks on them. I didn't mind it. I was still worried about Zhang Canwen's injuries. After returning to the hotel, I asked him if he wanted to go to the hospital. Although cultivators had strong recovery abilities, for external injuries like Zhang Canwen's, the hospital was more professional in dealing with them. That was why I asked him. However, Zhang Canwen shook his head. It's fine as long as he recovers on his own. It's inconvenient to go to the hospital. He insisted that I take him to his room. After settling him down, I was still worried about another matter. When I entered the Shang dynasty's royal tomb, it was the end of the second month of the lunar calendar. The beginning of the month was also the middle of the month when Xiao Jin would transform. At that time, I took him to a remote place nearby and told him to transform and hide there. I told him to wait for me to come out and pick him up. I looked at the time. It was the third day of the third month of the lunar calendar. In other words, I had stayed in the Shang dynasty's royal tomb for 3 days. Xiao Jin was hiding in the wilderness alone. He was probably getting anxious. This matter couldn't be delayed. I had to go and pick him up immediately. I didn't even have time to return to my room. After taking care of Zhang Canwen, I immediately set off again to the valley where Xiao Jin was staying. Anyang wasn't a prosperous place, but it had a lot of people. There were many populated areas near the city. The valley where Xiao Jin was staying was very far from the city. It was more than 100 kilometers away. After rushing for more than 2 hours, I finally reached the place. I lifted my head and saw that the ravine was in a mess. It was obviously caused by Little Gold's transformation. However, I couldn't see Little Gold's silhouette. I closed my eyes and used my wizard energy to sense. My heart sank. I couldn't see Xiao Jin's aura around. My eyes couldn't see every corner of the valley, but my wizard energy couldn't miss a single spot. In other words, Xiao Jin was gone. I couldn't help but frown. Where did he go? I hesitated for a while, but I didn't think about the worst. I walked around the valley. During the whole process, I didn't stop and used my wizard energy to sense. I was sure that I had covered the entire mountain range around the valley. However, it was all in vain. After walking around, I still couldn't sense Xiao Jin's aura. At this moment, I finally panicked. Xiao Jin's personality was similar to that of the zombie. They were both silly and simple-minded. I had told him to stay here and wait for me to come out. Logically speaking, he wouldn't go back on his word. But now, he had disappeared. If Xiao Jin didn't run around, it meant that he had encountered some unforeseen event. Anyang City was part of Hunan Province. In the 9 prefectures, Shaanxi and Hunan were the most prosperous places in the world of metaphysics. Although there weren't as many cultivators as there were hairs on an ox, they weren't rare. Could it be that when Xiao Jin transformed, the cultivators nearby sensed him? Chapter 386. Sudongpa had once said, "It's lonely at the top." Although my cultivation base wasn't high, I could see much more than ordinary people. Thus, the road of cultivation was destined to be lonely. On this road, Tong Tong was the one who had accompanied me the whole time, and then Xiao Jin. Thinking about it, Xiao Jin came to my side much later than Tong Tong. However, when I first met Xiao Jin, I had a strange feeling. It was as though he had some sort of deep connection with me in the unseen world. Although I couldn't figure out why I had this feeling, Xiao Jin's position in my heart was the same as Tong Tong's. Moreover, it was my idea to arrange for Xiao Jin to hide in the ravine. That was why I was worried and blamed myself. After thinking for a long time, I couldn't come up with an idea. I had to use the stupid method to expand the area and search around. I was busy until the sky turned dark. I had searched the area within 10 kilometers of the ravine. However, I couldn't find any suspicious traces, let alone Xiao Jin. I even called Tong Tong out of the jade bracelet and asked her and the little zombie to check the situation in the distance. However, just like me, they didn't find any trace of Xiao Jin. In the end, Tong Tong persuaded me to give up the idea of expanding the search area. I pondered for a while, then brought Tong Tong back to the hotel. Xiao Jin was missing. It was a fact that I had to search around like a headless fly. It wasn't a good thing for anyone. I had to return to the hotel and calm down first. Then, I could come up with a plan. On the way back, my mind was still in a mess. Fortunately, Tong Tong was very considerate. She sat next to me and comforted me, which made me feel better. It was late at night when I returned to the hotel. I went to check on Zhang Kanwen first. After confirming that he was all right, I returned to my room. As soon as I entered the room, I frowned. With my current cultivation base, as long as I memorized the appearance of a certain place, I would be able to detect it as soon as it changed. That day, when I left for the mausoleum of the king of the Shang dynasty, I took note of the room's condition and told the hotel's front desk not to let the waiters clean the room. However, at this moment, I found that the bed in the room was slightly different from when I left. Before I left, I had asked the attendant to clean up the bed. The bedsheets were newly changed, and there were no signs of someone pressing on them. However, there were obvious traces of someone sitting on the bedside near the headboard. During this time, someone must have come to my room. It was unlikely that the staff didn't pay attention to my request and accidentally barged in, because the staff only came in to clean. It was impossible for them to sit by the bed and rest. Then who could it be? Puzzled, I walked over and lowered my head to check the mark. However, as soon as I walked over and lowered my head, I saw a note next to the pillow. The note was as white as snow, and it was the same color as the pillow and the bedsheet. It wasn't obvious, and my attention was attracted by the mark on the bed, so I didn't notice it. This note didn't belong to my room. For the time being, I didn't care about the mark. I picked up the note and opened it. There was a line of crooked words on the note. "Master, I have something to do. I have to leave now. I will come back to see you later." It was just a simple line of words, and there was no signature. However, I recognized that it was Xiao Jin's note. Except for him, no one else would call me master. Now I knew why Xiao Jin wasn't in that valley. I felt a little relieved. However, at the same time I had more questions. Ever since Xiao Jin had been with me, besides transforming twice a month, he had only done two things. One was to use the true dragon chi in the jade bracelet to cultivate, and the other was to be in a daze. He had never mentioned anything to me, and he didn't talk much. I always felt that he was like a little zombie. Every day, he was ignorant and didn't think about anything. But now, he told me that he had something to do. With my relationship with him, if it wasn't something important, he would definitely give me a chance to say goodbye in person. But what was it that made Xiao Jin leave in such a hurry? I couldn't figure it out even after thinking for a long time. I was more worried than before when I couldn't find him. Tong Tong seemed to read my mind. She leaned on my shoulder and hugged my arm coquettishly. "Brother, Xiao Jin is very smart. He has his reasons for doing something. You don't need to worry too much. Moreover, he's a Tai Sui. Although he doesn't have any power, he has the body of a Tai Sui. People with a low cultivation base can't hurt him. Even if he suffers any losses, as long as he waits for the time it takes for him to transform, Little Gold will be able to easily escape." Tong Tong's analysis was right. After all, Xiao Jin was Tai Sui. With just the strength of his body, cultivators below the Heaven Master level could not break through his body's defense. Even if the Heaven Master could break through his defense, it was basically impossible to kill him. As long as he wasn't killed, no matter how strong the enemy was, they wouldn't be able to withstand one slap from Xiao Jin. With this analysis, Xiao Jin wouldn't be in trouble. But I didn't know why I was so scared. I couldn't loosen my tense mind. I sighed and said to Tong Tong, "I hope so." Then, I reached out and smoothed the seat marks on the bed. I lifted the quilt and was ready to sleep. These days in the mausoleum of the Yinshang dynasty, My nerves had been stretched taut. When I finally killed Lu Ziang, I had gone through a fierce battle. At this moment, my body and spirit had long been exhausted to the extreme. I had to have a good rest to relieve this fatigue. Perhaps I was affected by Xiao Jin's sudden departure. Although I was exhausted, I couldn't fall asleep when I laid on the bed. Tong Tong seemed to know that I wasn't in a good mood. She looked at me with concern. After I lay down, she didn't return to the jade bracelet. Instead, she sat by the bed and looked at me tenderly. After waiting for a long time, I still couldn't fall asleep. Tong Tong suddenly lifted the quilt and got into my bed. She hugged my arm and softly said to me, "Brother, if you can't fall asleep, I'll sleep with you. I saw on TV that listening to music is good for sleep. I'll sing for you." As she said that, she started to sing a very popular love song to me. I laid there and opened my mouth, but I couldn't say anything. Tong Tong had always been close to me. It had been like this since she was a little girl. Hugging and comforting each other was normal. But now, it seemed a little different. Although she was a ghost, her body grew like a normal human. She wasn't a little girl anymore. She had grown into a beautiful, graceful girl. Even so, Tong Tong hadn't changed in my eyes. I didn't shy away from intimate actions. To me, she was my family. But at this moment, she suddenly crawled into my bed, hugged my arm, and snuggled up to me. It made me feel a little awkward. Although she had a ghost body, her body was solid. After she woke up from the silkworm cocoon, her body wasn't different from a normal human's. In this awkward position, I couldn't help but touch some sensitive parts. I didn't know if Tong Tong felt strange or not, but I felt very uncomfortable. It wasn't that I was uncomfortable. Quite the contrary, I felt inexplicably comfortable. However, this comfortable feeling hid a kind of restlessness. Instinctively, I swallowed my saliva and moved slightly. I wanted to pull my arm out of Tong Tong's embrace. However, as soon as I moved, Tong Tong sensed it. She didn't stop singing the love song, but her arms tightened. I didn't know if she did it on purpose or subconsciously. In short, she hugged me tighter. Chapter 387. Time passed very slowly while I was in a state of battle. Tong Tong's love song seemed to have been sung for 60 years before it faded away. Only then did I let out a sigh of relief. My tense mind calmed down a little. Tong Tong didn't seem to notice my embarrassment. After she finished singing, she leaned on my shoulder and whispered to me, "Gidge, are you feeling better?" I nodded. I'm feeling much better." Tong Tong's worry turned into joy. She chuckled and rubbed her head against my chest. She asked in a lazy voice, "It's so comfortable to lie down like this. Is this the feeling of sleeping? I've never slept before. Gidge, can I sleep with you?" Her words had a lot of ambiguity, which made people's imagination run wild. However, after hearing her words, the feeling in my heart suddenly disappeared. Tong Tong said that she had never slept before. Yes, sleeping was something that only humans needed. Ghosts didn't need it. Although Tong Tong had become a ghost child by chance, and her growth and development were no different from a human's, she wasn't a human after all. Moreover, she had never experienced what it felt like to be a human. I suddenly felt distressed. I couldn't help but turn around and hug Tong Tong. I said to her gently, "Silly, this isn't the feeling of sleeping. It's just resting. Sleeping is not doing anything. You don't think about anything. Just empty yourself. Try it. Come, close your eyes." Slowly. I wanted to ask her to breathe slowly, but I remembered that Tong Tong didn't breathe. I kept silent for a while and didn't say anything. I just hugged Tong Tong tighter. Tong Tong didn't think too much. She still had a smile on her face. She closed her eyes and seemed to really fall asleep. I also closed my eyes and breathed slowly. After a long time, I still didn't fall asleep. I lowered my head to look at Tong Tong. I couldn't help but think of a question. It would be great if Tong Tong was a human. Of course, there was also Tao Wu. I thought that I didn't reject their identities, but there were some things that I always wanted to make more perfect. Thinking about this, I had an intense thought. Could I use Xian techniques to turn Tong Tong and Tao Wu into humans? Yin and Yang are different paths, that is the truth of the world, even for a cultivator like me. Based on the Tao techniques that I have come into contact with so far, there is no possibility of changing Yin and Yang. However, during this trip to the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum, I heard from the Celestial Masters about realms such as Rush Lift and Sunset Lift. It is obvious that these realms are far higher than the Yang Shun Celestial Master. The mysterious technique of the Yang God Celestial Master is already amazing enough. The power of a higher level must be even more powerful. If I have that kind of cultivation in the future, it might not be impossible to reverse Yin and Yang. As I thought of this, the tiredness that I had accumulated earlier slowly washed over me. I slowly closed my eyes and fell asleep. I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, it was already the afternoon of the second day. The moment I opened my eyes, I saw Tong Tong looking at me with her large eyes. Her body was still the same as the night before, nestled in my embrace. At this moment, I no longer had the romantic thoughts from last night. I sat up with a smile and lovingly rubbed Tong Tong's head. I asked her, "Did you just accompany me for a night? Why didn't you return to the jade bracelet to cultivate?" Tong Tong stuck out her tongue and sat up from the bed. She softly smiled and said, "It's very comfortable to sleep with brother. I don't want to return to the jade bracelet to cultivate. Brother, from now on, when you sleep every night, I will accompany you to sleep, okay?" I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Tong Tong was innocent and didn't feel that there was anything wrong with what she said. However, I couldn't help but think of the awkwardness from last night. I didn't know if I should agree or reject her. After hesitating for a long time, I lowered my head and looked at Tong Tong's expectant gaze. I really couldn't bear to reject her. In the end, I nodded and agreed. Tong Tong softly cheered. She straightened her body on the bed and moved next to me. She quickly kissed my cheek. Then, with a shy expression, she didn't say anything and returned to the jade bracelet with a flash of her body. Her action stunned me again. Why did Tong Tong kiss me? Is she really as innocent and naive as I thought? I sat on the bed and kept silent for a while. I smiled wryly and shook my head. I didn't know much about relationships, so I didn't want to think too much about it. I would just let nature take its course. There was no need to worry about nothing. After I got up, I washed my face and rinsed my mouth. I remembered that Zhang Canwen couldn't take care of himself due to his injuries. It was already afternoon. I guessed that he hadn't had a meal that day. I quickly went to his room. Yesterday, because I had to take care of Zhang Canwen, I specifically went to the front desk of the hotel to get a room card for his room. I didn't knock on the door and directly used the card to open the door. When I entered the room, I saw that Zhang Canwen's room was empty. He wasn't in the room. My complexion instantly changed. Zhang Canwen's injuries weren't light. Although he could barely move his body and walk, walking would only delay the recovery of his injuries. It was unlikely that Zhang Canwen would go out on his own. Could it be that he had been kidnapped? But I had never heard that Zhang Canwen had a grudge against anyone. Even if he had an enemy, it wouldn't be a coincidence that they found him at this time, right? After learning from Xiao Jin's disappearance yesterday, I didn't hurry to search around. I went to Zhang Canwen's room to check. Sure enough, he found some clues with this inspection. Zhang Canwen's luggage was still in his room. This proved that he didn't leave on his own like Xiao Jin. Moreover, there was no sign of a fight in the room. I closed my eyes to sense, but I didn't find any trace of Tao energy. Although Zhang Canwen was injured, he couldn't have been kidnapped by an ordinary person. If he had been kidnapped, the culprit would have used a Tao technique and left some clues. I felt strange. I hesitated for a while, and was about to go to the front desk to ask about the situation. Right at this moment the door opened. Zhang Kanwen pushed it open and walked in. Seeing me in the room, Zhang Kanwen was bewildered. Then, he walked toward me. I heaved a sigh of relief. I got up and asked, "Brother Zhang, how are your injuries? Why did you go out alone?" Zhang Kanwen's face was still pale. He shook his head and said, "My injuries are fine, but I still can't use my Tao energy. It won't be a problem for me to walk around." I guessed that he had some kind of healing medicine. Seeing that he was fine, I relaxed. I sat on the side of his bed and smiled at him. "Since you are fine, let's hurry back. In the royal tomb, I killed Lu Xiang. The Lu family will definitely rush here in 2 to 3 days. If they find me, it will be troublesome." Zhang Kanwen shook his head. He had a strange expression on his face, as though he still had some lingering fear. He opened his mouth and said to me in a low voice, "The Lu family is here." "What?" I was shocked and quickly sat up on the bed. At the same time, I circulated the shaman energy in my body and looked behind Zhang Kanwen. In the end, there was no one behind Zhang Kanwen. I relaxed a little and asked him, "What happened? How did you know that the Lu family is here?" Zhang Kanwen shook his head and didn't answer my question. He turned and walked toward the door. He said to me, "Follow me." I hesitated. In the end, I felt that Zhang Kanwen wouldn't harm me since we had been through thick and thin together for so long. So, I followed him out. After we went out, Zhang Kanwen quickly led the way. We left the hotel and headed toward the direction of the Yinshang Royal Tomb. Zhang Kanwen stopped when we reached the Yinshang Royal Tomb Ruins Museum. I lifted my head and was shocked. The entrance of the museum was surrounded by a group of people. There were also many policemen walking back and forth. There was also a circle of police tape at the entrance. I didn't understand, so I asked Zhang Kanwen, "What happened?" Zhang Kanwen didn't answer me directly. Instead, he pointed at a window next to the entrance that was also surrounded by a group of people. He said to me, "You can see the situation inside from there." I was full of doubts. I easily squeezed through the crowd and went to the window to take a look. Immediately I was dumbfounded. In the middle of the hall of the Yinshang Royal Tomb Ruins Museum, there were more than 10 corpses piled up like a small mountain. Moreover, I knew all of them. They were the heavenly masters that had entered the Hall of Sacrifice earlier. Gu Lilai of the Metaphysics Society, Zhang Daozhang of Mount Longhu, Lu Xiang, who I had killed, and the heavenly master of the Han family, including the 7 heavenly masters, were also piled up here. A total of 18 heavenly masters had perished. Chapter 388. I was completely dumbfounded. There were a total of 18 celestial masters. Excluding the 7 celestial masters who died in the hands of the evil sacrificial spirit, there were still 11 celestial masters. Among these 11 celestial masters, there were 8 Yang God celestial masters, including President Gu and Zhang Daozhang from Mount Longhu. Yesterday, I didn't even dare to kill President Gu. Who would have thought that they would all be killed today? If this news spread out, the entire metaphysics world would be in chaos. Whether it was the Metaphysics Society or Mount Longhu, they would all be shocked. But who did it? I didn't think much as Nangong's figure appeared in my head. After leaving the royal tomb yesterday, only the celestial masters and Nangong were left in the sacrificial hall. Moreover, Nangong told me that his cultivation base had recovered a little. From this point, it seemed that besides Nangong, there was no one else. But if Nangong wanted to kill them, why did he have to send me away first? I didn't have any friendship with these people. To some extent, there was hatred between us. If Nangong insisted on killing them, I would have raised both of my hands to support him. Moreover, even if Nangong sent me away to kill them, why did he have to bring their corpses out in public? Wouldn't it be better to let these people rot in the sacrificial hall? There must be something strange going on. As I thought about it, I suddenly realized a serious problem. If the murderer wasn't Nangong, where was he now? Would he be in danger? Although he had said that he had recovered a little bit of his cultivation base, he wasn't at his peak condition. If someone was hiding in the sacrificial hall, would they also attack Nangong after killing these celestial masters? As I thought about it, I carefully checked. In that pile of flesh and blood, many corpses had turned into broken pieces. Moreover, they were piled up together. It was possible that some people that I couldn't see were buried under them. In other words, was Nangong also in that pile of corpses? I was very anxious and hated that I couldn't rush in to check. However, there were a lot of people watching and the lobby was full of policemen. I didn't dare to act rashly and could only stand there anxiously. After waiting for a while, I saw that the policemen didn't seem to want to dig up the pile of corpses. I thought for a moment and squeezed out of the crowd. I turned around to find Zhang Kanwen and asked him worriedly, "What happened?" Zhang Kanwen shook his head with a solemn expression. "I don't know either. It's just that I heard a lot of people making a ruckus here at noon. I even heard someone shouting, 'Someone's dead,' so I came out to check it out of curiosity. Then, I saw this scene. I frowned and stayed silent for a while. Then, I asked, 'What did you mean when you said that the Liu family is here?'" Nangong pointed at the museum ruins and asked curiously, "Didn't you see the Liu family in the museum ruins?" I was bewildered. I was scared by the corpses, so I didn't pay attention to see who was in the museum. Nangong seemed to see through my thoughts and continued, "When I came over to check on the situation, I saw 3 people from the Liu family walk in. One of them was the Liu Qingyi we met last time. They should still be inside." My heart shivered. The Liu family couldn't have come after receiving the news that all the heavenly masters were dead. They couldn't be that fast. They must have rushed here because of Liu Xiang's death, but they just happened to see this scene. The Liu family must have come here to find the murderer who killed Liu Xiang. According to what Liu Xiang said that day, the Liu family might already know that I was the one who did it. I stayed silent for a while and didn't take the risk to confirm the Liu family's identity. Instead, I asked Zhang Kanwen another question that I was more concerned about. "When you found the pile of corpses, did you see Nangong?" Zhang Kanwen shook his head and quickly asked me, "Do you think it was Nangong who did it?" It was obvious that he had the same thought as me. He felt that it was very likely that Nangong killed these people. Actually, I had asked him if he had seen Nangong's corpse, but he had answered my question at least. I let out a breath of relief. As long as Nangong wasn't dead, it didn't matter to me whether Nangong killed these people or not. After staying silent for a while, I turned to look at Zhang Kanwen and said, "The Liu family is already here, and the one leading them is Liu Qingyi. I can't stay here any longer. Let's leave immediately. What do you think?" Zhang Kanwen didn't hesitate and immediately nodded. Leaving is the best option. Although the situation is different, if the Liu family can confirm that you killed Liu Xiang, they might put the blame on you for the deaths of the others. Moreover, it's unlikely that I will be able to get away from it. At that time, the entire Metaphysics Association will be in an uproar. It's too dangerous to stay here. Let's not waste any more time and leave immediately." After getting his agreement, I didn't say anything else. I immediately turned around and headed back to the hotel with him. When we arrived outside our room, Zhang Kanwen and I packed our luggage separately and returned to our own rooms. As soon as I entered the room, I was stunned again. Nangong was sitting at the head of my bed. I didn't react in time. I looked at him blankly and didn't say anything for a long time. In the end, Nangong chuckled and asked me, "What's wrong? Were you shocked after seeing the corpses of the Heaven's Masters?" I gulped and calmed down a little. I quickly asked him, "Those people, did you kill them?" Nangong smiled and shook his head. "I didn't kill them." I heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, I was even more confused. "If you didn't kill them, then they must have been killed by someone else. There are other people hiding in the spring sacrifice hall. How did you escape?" Nangong looked at me thoughtfully before asking me with a smile, "What's wrong? You don't believe me?" I opened my mouth, but before I could reply, Nangong smiled and waved his hand. Actually, I don't know how they died either. After all of you left yesterday, I got those people to follow you and leave while I searched for an item in the spring sacrifice hall. It wasn't until this morning that I finally succeeded. When I came out from the underground, I discovered that all of them were dead. As for how they died, I'm as confused as you are. With my status and relationship with Nangong, there was no need for him to lie to me. Thus, I immediately believed his words and smiled wryly. Even though we didn't kill them, if the Lu family knew that I killed Lu Zieng, I'm afraid that the deaths of the others will be blamed on me. I'm afraid that I won't be able to hide from them even if I hide at the ends of the earth. Nangong nodded. That's right. I'm afraid that the entire metaphysics world will be frantically searching for you. What do you intend to do? To be honest, I had an idea at this moment, which was to escape to the Fire God Temple to look for Bayan. Even though with her cultivation, it wasn't possible for her to deal with the entire metaphysics world. However, that place was very secretive and the people from the metaphysics world wouldn't be able to find it for the time being. Nangong also knew about Bayan, so I didn't hide it from him and told him what I had in mind. Nangong nodded. That's a good idea, but it's not a long-term plan. How about this? You go there for a few days first. After I've prepared myself, I'll bring you to a safe place. What do you think? A safe place? I looked at Nangong and asked him where exactly it was. Nangong shook his head. I can't tell you for the time being. After saying that, he stood up from the bed and pointed at a wooden box on the bed. That's right. This is the item that I've been looking for in the sacrificial hall. Didn't I say that I was looking for it for you last time? Here, I'll give it to you. After saying that, he patted his butt and left the room just like before. After he left, I walked over and picked up the wooden box to take a look. I was instantly shocked. The wooden box looked extremely simple and unadorned. There were some complicated veined patterns engraved on it. Moreover, each of the veined patterns hid an extremely astonishing aura of Dao Qi. I had only stared at one of the veined patterns for a while, but my heart was already filled with fear. It was as though the veined patterns hid a monstrous killing intent that made me shudder. Moreover, the most important thing wasn't the engraved veined patterns, but the 3 ancient characters in the middle of the wooden box. Chapter 389. Xianyuan's Sword. Whether it was in the metaphysics world or the ordinary world, these 3 words were well known. Any educated Chinese child would know that it was the sword of the Yellow Emperor, the ancestor of China. They also knew that it was one of the ancient divine weapons that represented China. As for the world of metaphysics, there was no need to mention it. The 10 great ancient artifacts were the most powerful artifacts in the world. Among the ancient divine weapons, the Xianyuan sword ranked second, just below the Eastern Emperor bell. According to the legends, this sword was given to Yellow Emperor Xianyuan by the gods in heaven. It was the peerless divine sword that defeated Qi Yu. It contained endless power and could slay demons. It was always successful. Was this what Nangong was looking for in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty? I couldn't believe it. The cultivators in the metaphysics world were like legends to ordinary people. However, they weren't legends. The Xianyuan sword was different. It was a divine weapon from the legends, even to cultivators like us. Although Nangong was powerful, he couldn't defeat the celestial masters of the Metaphysics Society and Longhu Mountain. His cultivation base was only at the Yang God Celestial Master level. A Yang God Celestial Master could get the Xianyuan sword. It sounded like a 3-year-old child getting a Celestial Master's magical weapon. The difference between the two was too big. However, I didn't believe that the Xianyuan sword was fake. My senses wouldn't lie to me. At this moment, I hadn't even opened the sword case, but I could already sense a destructive wave of Qi of the Wei. I couldn't imagine how terrifying the power contained in the sword was. With my cultivation base, I couldn't make a judgment on this kind of power. I didn't want to think about it. I gritted my teeth and decided to open it first. However, when I pressed the lid of the sword box, the lid didn't move. I thought there was some kind of mechanism. I stared at it for a long time, but I couldn't find the mechanism. The lid of the sword box couldn't be opened. What's the use of Nangong giving it to me? I was a little discouraged. I hugged the sword box and was about to sit on the bed to continue studying it. When I looked up, I saw a piece of paper on the bed where the sword box used to be. I could vaguely see some words on it. I picked it up and saw Nangong's handwriting. The Yellow Emperor, son of Xiaohao. His brother, Shennong, created the mountain and sea realm. When the demon Emperor Jun invaded the mortal world, the Xianyuan clan and Shennong joined forces to stop him. Later, the demon Emperor Jun secretly invaded the mountain and sea realm. Shennong was no match for him, so he transformed into a mist and sealed off the realm barrier. Demon Emperor Feng had acquired the power of primal chaos in the mountain and sea realm, then borrowed the bloodline of the daughter of Shennong to escape alone and invade the world of men. The Xianyuan clan was defeated and died. The Gao Xian clan borrowed the power of the Xianyuan sword and merged with the demon Tharch-Chi as one. His descendants absorbed all the chaos in the world to weaken the demon Thearka's power. During the Zhou dynasty, King Wen made a divination, and the demon Emperor Qi and Gao Xian family finally passed away. The calamity of the human world was eliminated, and civilization began to flourish. After I finished reading, I was dumbfounded. What was Nangong's intention in writing so many words about ancient history? Although he mentioned the Yellow Emperor, what did these things have to do with the suspected Xianyuan sword he left behind? I couldn't figure it out. I lowered my head and studied for a long time, but I still couldn't figure it out. The ancient Chinese legends were complicated. Although I was interested in history, I only knew that the Xianyuan clan was the Yellow Emperor, and the Shennong clan was the Yen Emperor. As for the Gao Xian clan and the monster Tharch-Chi, I had never heard of them. I put the note down and pondered for a while. Then, I picked up my phone and started to search for the Gao Xian clan and the monster Tharch-Chi. Before I could find the answer, Zhang Canwen pushed the door open and came in. "I'm ready. You can leave at any time. How are things here?" He interrupted me, and I remembered why I had hurried back here. Although I was curious, Anyang City was too dangerous at this moment. I didn't dare to linger. I quickly packed up and left with the little zombie. We checked out of the hotel. Zhang Canwen's wounds had healed well. Not only could he walk, but he could also drive. After we left the hotel, everything was the same. Zhang Canwen drove while the little zombie and I sat in the back seat. We left Anyang City and headed to the south. In the car, I had time to check my phone again. I continued to search for the Gao Xian clan and the monster Tharch-Chi. After a quick search, I found that the Gao Xian clan was Emperor Ku, one of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. According to the legends, Emperor Ku was the Yellow Emperor's great-grandson. It was the same as what Nangong had written on the note. I checked Emperor Ku's information for a while, but didn't find anything. I continued to search for the monster Tharch-Chi, but I found a person called Emperor Ku. The information on this person wasn't as complete as that of Emperor Ku. After searching for a long time, historians and mythologists couldn't come to a conclusion about his identity. They said that he was actually Xiaohao, and then they said that he was the same person as Emperor Ku. There were all kinds of theories. In general, the only thing that could be confirmed about this Emperor Ku was that he was a fictional character recorded in the Classic of Mountains and Seas. As for the content that Nangong had written, it wasn't recorded in history. Even in the legends, there wasn't any similar information. Later on, I searched for the Xianyuan sword, but I didn't find any useful information. I couldn't help but feel discouraged. I couldn't help but complain in my heart. Nangong must have wanted to tell me something when he wrote that note. Moreover, it must be something very important. However, this fellow was still the same as before. He didn't say anything and used this kind of guessing method to confuse me. In the end, I couldn't understand his true intentions. I even suspected that this fellow had some kind of bad hobby. He didn't want me to get the Xian Yuan sword that easily, so he purposely gave me a riddle to solve. Only by solving the riddle could I get the sword back. After thinking for a while, I decided to put this matter aside. Although the Xian Yuan sword was very attractive to me, the problem I was facing now was the pursuit from the metaphysics world. Just like what Zhang Canwen had said, the heavenly masters were all dead, and the Lu family could confirm that I was the one who killed Lu Ziang. That way, the Lu family could easily push the blame of everyone's death to me. At this moment, running for my life was more important. I had to put the Xian Yuan sword second. However, when I was about to put down my phone, I suddenly remembered the murals in the royal tomb and the man who looked exactly like me. I hurriedly opened the pictures in my phone and looked at the murals from top to bottom one more time. When I was in the royal tomb, I had analyzed the murals and deduced that the man in the murals was the ancestor of the Shang dynasty. Now that I had read them one more time, I was even more certain. Originally, I didn't think too much about this information. I just thought that it was an ancient legend and that I couldn't investigate it anymore. However, after reading through so many ancient myths, I realized that the so-called ancestor of the Shang dynasty should be able to find out more about the specific person. With that thought, I hurried to open my phone and continued to search. This time, it didn't take me long to find the ancestor of the Shang dynasty. He was called Qi or Shang-Chi. He was also an unknown character from the ancient times. I had read his information and experiences for a long time, but I didn't find anything. Finally, when I checked his information, I found a clue. That Shang-Chi was the son of Emperor Ku. Nangong had purposely left Emperor Ku's name on the note he left me. Was he trying to hint me about this? But what did it prove? That I was the reincarnation of this Shang-Chi? What happened next? Gao Xinshi had used the Xian Yuan sword to kill that monster Emperor Feng. Was that why he found the Xian Yuan sword and gave it to me? It sounded like it was related, but I had a feeling that it wasn't limited to that. In addition to this discovery, I also made another important discovery. This Shang-Chi was conferred the title of Fire Judge by his father, Emperor Ku. He was also known as the Consort Earl and God of Fire. Until now, Shang-Chiu still had the title of Konbatai. At this moment, I was about to go to the Fire God Temple where Bai An was. The two words Fire God touched my nerves. Chapter 390. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but recall the situation back then. The silver-eyed stone man had stood up from the wide red chair with a strange smile on his face. He had told me that I was early. I didn't understand what he meant back then, and only felt that it was strange. However, according to my deduction, the silver-eyed man was obviously my previous incarnation. It was obvious that there was some kind of fate that was controlling me to go there sooner or later. The silver-eyed man had said that I was early last time. What about this time? Was it the right time for me to go to the Fire God Temple according to fate's arrangement? As for Nangong, he had only told me about the battle of witchcraft. It had sounded like a battle between two factions in the metaphysics world. But now everything was different. It seemed to be a problem left behind from the primeval times. Although Nangong's note had only written power of chaos and origin, a simple analysis showed that Tai Sui was obviously from chaos. The power of chaos he had mentioned was most likely witchcraft energy. As for the so-called origin, it was probably Taoist Qi. According to his note, Shenong cultivated the power of chaos while Xianyuan cultivated the origin with the power of chaos. The two of them worked together to fight against the monster emperor. Moreover, Emperor Yen and Emperor Huang fought against Qi Yu together to spread the Chinese civilization. It was a story that all Chinese people were familiar with. If that was the case, The witchcraft seemed to be a family in ancient times. As for why they became enemies later on, the note had also given a reason. His descendants absorbed the power of chaos to weaken the monster emperor. This was obviously the same as my speculation that the Shang dynasty had used a secret sacrificial technique to transform Tai Sui into a real dragon vein. Everything seemed to make sense now. However, there was one thing that I was curious about. Nangong cultivated witchcraft energy, and so did I. Even if the war of witchcraft was just a misunderstanding, why did he give me the Xianyuan sword? Was it because I was the reincarnation of the Shang-Chi? Even if I cultivated witchcraft energy, it wouldn't affect me using the Xianyuan sword? After a simple analysis, I felt that it was unlikely. Although witchcraft and witchcraft came from the same source, their natures were different. Disregarding everything else, just the ripples of the Xianyuan sword's sword case made me feel uncomfortable. If I really held the Xianyuan sword in my hand to fight, I was afraid that I would injure myself before I could harm the enemy. As I thought about this, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. I had originally thought that I would only be accompanying Zhang Kanwen on this trip to Anyang. I didn't expect so many things to happen here. More importantly, all of this had nothing to do with Zhang Kanwen, who insisted on coming here. Instead, it was closely related to me, who came here unintentionally. It was said that there was heaven's will in the unseen world. Could this be the so-called heaven's will? The path of cultivation was not only about cultivation, but also about one's state of mind. The word heaven's will is enough to make every cultivator feel awe. I am the same. But what I don't understand is, if all of this is heaven's will, then what is my mission? Everything had a cause, even heaven's will. After the heavenly revelation, there must be a mandate of heaven. If God had given me such a revelation, then what was the mandate of heaven that he wanted to give me? Confucius said, "Know the mandate of heaven at the age of 50. It was originally a mocking and elegant way of saying it. It meant that when people reached the age of 50, they would generally have diseases. When the weather changed, the parts of the body that had the disease would sense it. This was the so-called, know the mandate of heaven. Of course, this was just the surface. The deeper meaning was that after knowing the mandate of heaven, people were powerless to change the result. Thus, the original meaning of know the mandate of heaven had a strong meaning of accept the mandate of heaven. At this time, I also thought of the meaning of accept the mandate of heaven. People always said, heaven's will is hard to go against. It was clear that heaven's will couldn't be resisted by ordinary people. Thus, I was very afraid. Everyone's understanding of power was different. A teenager might think that he was the strongest person in the world, but when he reached his 20s, he wouldn't have such a thought. Of course, it wasn't because his power had deteriorated. On the contrary, as he grew older, his power actually increased. The reason why he had such a thought was because his vision had increased along with his power. He could see further and more powerful people. That was why people always said, the older you are in Jianghu, the more timid you become. It was the same for cultivators. When I was in the dragon-seeking realm, I saw the heavenly masters and felt that the power of the human world had reached its limit. But now, especially after I saw so many heavenly masters die under the hands of the evil spirits, I realized that the power of the heavenly masters was weak and insignificant. This was only the power of humans. If I raised my head and looked up at the sky, I would feel even more insignificant. To cultivators, the mandate of heaven wasn't something illusory, but it was something concrete. The Buddhists had epiphanies, while the Taoists and mystics also had Tianqi. To some extent, this trip to the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty was my Tianqi. With these thoughts in mind, I didn't say a word the entire way. When we reached the border of Hubei, I called Zhang Kanwen to stop the car and let him drive back. I brought the little zombie to the Shenangjia scenic area. Before I got off the car, I was worried about Zhang Kanwen's situation. He told me that he would find a place to live in seclusion after returning to Guangdong. He would use the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness to hide his aura. It wouldn't be easy for people in the metaphysics world to find him. I was relieved. Without hesitation, I quickly headed in the direction of the Fire God Temple. Calculating the time, it had already exceeded the half a year that I had agreed on with Tao Wu. She had been living in the Fire God Temple all year round, so she was probably anxious. That was why I was traveling at a fast speed. With my current cultivation base, it only took me half a day to pass through the scenic area and a large primitive forest to reach the Fire God Temple. The Fire God Temple's hidden mechanism was still there. With my power, I couldn't force my way in. When I arrived, I stood by the river where the fatty had performed his divination. I looked at the emptiness in front of me and didn't say a word. The opening of the Fire God Temple required a special method from the people of the divination faction. I naturally didn't have that ability. According to my original agreement with Tao Wu, when I returned here again, I just had to call out her name. She would sense it and help me open the Fire God Temple. However, I was clear that there was definitely a connection between me and the Fire God Temple. That was why I didn't call out to Tao Wu and simply looked at her. If all of this was a revelation from the heavens, why would Tao Wu need to open the door for me? As expected, in just a few seconds, a lustrous light appeared in front of me. The mountain range in the distance disappeared and was replaced by a majestic main hall. Looking at the 3 words Fire God Temple, my heart started beating faster. The first time I came here, I couldn't enter even after using all of my strength. At that time, I felt that it was weird. Now, it seemed that the silver-eyed person had said that the timing wasn't right and that I had come too early. Although I had entered the second time, it was through a different method. I didn't have any memories of it, so it couldn't be counted as the timing. Until this time, the timing that the silver-eyed person had mentioned might have really come. What exactly was waiting for me behind the crimson door? I took a deep breath and walked to the crimson stone steps at the entrance of the hall. Looking at the threshold in front of me, I lifted my leg without any hesitation. The resistance from before didn't appear again, and I successfully stepped onto the step. Outside the Fire God Temple, I didn't feel anything even though I was standing at the entrance. However, the moment I entered, I felt that the air was filled with the power of fire. Even though the stone tablet that was carved with the words East Jun Si Ming, Ing Hor Shou Xian had been taken away by the people from the Metaphysics Association, it didn't affect the presence of fire. I looked forward and saw the crimson platform that I had seen before, as well as the gigantic crimson chair on it. The chair was exactly the same as the huge statue's chair in the Yinshang royal tomb, except for the color. Chapter 391. I wasn't in a hurry. I stood there and looked around. The last time I was in the Fire God Temple, I had searched for the fatty's father's whereabouts. I went to almost all the places I could go, but I didn't see the silver-eyed person, nor did I see the scarlet Fire God throne. This time, I saw the throne the moment I entered. Even though the silver-eyed person hadn't appeared, I believed that he wasn't far away. After waiting for a while, there was still no movement in the surroundings. I jumped onto the platform and walked towards the scarlet throne. Based on my conjecture, the half-human half-beast statue and the silver-eyed person in the Shang dynasty's sacrifice hall were both from my previous life. The two of them were more or less the same. From this, it could be seen that the scarlet throne was mine. When I had just entered the spring sacrifice hall, the scene of me sitting on a high place and accepting the blood sacrifice of everyone appeared in my mind. If that was the memory of my previous life, it was highly possible that it was triggered by the throne I was sitting on. Thus, I didn't hesitate and walked to the front of the throne, preparing to sit on it first. When I reached the front, I extended my hand to touch the scarlet patterns on it. In the end, when my hand touched the throne, I felt an intense burning sensation. I instinctively retracted my hand. With my current cultivation, the toughness of my physical body had already reached an extremely high level. However, when I raised my hand to take a look, the skin on my palm that had just touched the chair had already been burned to the point of wrinkling, forming an ugly scar. It looked similar to the patterns on the blazing stones that the Metaphysics Association had given me. My heart moved, and I tried to use the Tao Qi in my body to sense it. As expected, the chair was emitting an intense aura of fire. It was even more intense than the aura on the stone tablet that was made of blazing stones. I could almost confirm that the material of the chair was definitely blazing stones. Furthermore, the power of fire contained within was even stronger. It was highly possible that the aura of fire that filled the entire fire god temple came from this chair. Currently, I had already reached the later stages of glorious memory and didn't have much need for blazing stones. However, even the wealthiest person in the world would inevitably feel greed when they saw a pair of gold pieces in front of them. I was no exception. Looking at this gigantic chair, I couldn't help but think that if I took the entire chair out and cut the blazing stone on it into small pieces, it would be easy to gather a faction in the metaphysics world. It was a pity that these obsidian stones were of the fire element. If all 5 elements were present, I might be able to use these obsidian stones to let my Tao Qi reach glory of knowledge. Although obsidian stones could be traded in the metaphysics world, it was only a sporadic transaction. With so many obsidian stones being traded at the same time, even if Mount Longhu and the Metaphysics Association worked together, it would still be difficult to complete the transaction. As I thought of this, my greedy thoughts disappeared. I retracted my gaze from the chair and prepared to sit on it. However, just as I turned around, my gaze froze. I finally saw the silver-eyed man. He was standing not far behind me, looking at me with a burning gaze. The expression on his face looked very strange. I wasn't too surprised, but I stopped myself from sitting down and looked into his eyes. After a few seconds, the silver-eyed man finally spoke. The content was exactly the same as the previous time. He asked softly, "You're here?" This time I didn't panic. I just nodded and replied in a deep voice, "That's right, I'm here." As I replied, I was slightly bewildered. According to my conjecture, the statue in the spring sacrifice hall and this silver-eyed man were from my previous life. However, at least one side of the statue's body looked exactly the same as me. However, the stone man in front of me looked completely different from me. Actually, I had my suspicions for a long time, but previously, I thought that it was because I didn't see the appearance of the silver-eyed stone man clearly when I first came here. However, it seemed that it wasn't the case. Just as I was pondering over this question, the silver-eyed stone man suddenly grinned after hearing my reply. A joyful smile swiftly filled his face. However, his smile made me feel that something was wrong. The previous time I came here, I saw that the silver-eyed man's body was made of a stone-like material. That was why I initially thought that he was a statue. However, this time, when he grinned, there wasn't a trace of stiffness on his face. He looked just like a living person. Originally, I thought that this silver-eyed stone man was most likely a human-shaped magic tool that was created using an ancient Taoist secret technique. It was similar to a Taoist puppet. However, I suddenly realized that this silver-eyed man was most likely a living person. If it was as I had guessed, that he was Shang-Chi, the ancestor of the Shang family, wouldn't that mean that he had lived for thousands of years? It was impossible for a human's lifespan to be that long. Even if one reached the heavenly master realm, it was impossible for one to transcend the shackles of aging, sickness, and death. At most, one's lifespan would be slightly longer than an ordinary person's. Only when one became a legendary celestial and transcended the mortal world could one obtain true longevity. Could it be that this Shang-Chi was an celestial? However, if he was an celestial, who was I? It was impossible for a living person or an celestial to reincarnate. I remained silent. After the silver-eyed man finished laughing, He walked forward and stopped next to me. His eyes were still fixed on me, but his knees gave way and he knelt on the ground. I was shocked. What did this mean? The silver-eyed man's eyes slowly moved away from my face and his head slowly knelt on the ground. Then, he finally opened his mouth and said, "Emperor Dong said that the sword spirit isn't with him, but with my father." Emperor Dong? Sword spirit? Father? Before I could react, the silver-eyed man lifted his head to look at me again. Then, he quickly knelt his head on the ground 8 more times, making it 9 times. Then, he stood up from the ground. Without another word, he turned and walked far away. I couldn't react to his sudden action. It wasn't until his figure disappeared into the darkness that I anxiously shouted at him, "Who am I? Who are you? Are you Shang-Chi?" Hearing my voice, the silver-eyed man suddenly stopped. He turned and said to me, "I am Shang-Chi. As for who my father is, my father knows. The chess game that has been going on for 10,000 years is only 1 step away. Take care, my father." Then, he didn't turn back and disappeared into the darkness ahead. I was anxious. Just as I was about to chase after him and question him again, my vision suddenly darkened. The red light that filled the surroundings suddenly disappeared. Where was the silver-eyed man? At this moment, a delicate voice sounded in my ear. "Husband, you're back?" The voice came from behind me. I quickly turned around. I didn't know where the red chair that had been behind me had gone. I even realized that I wasn't standing on the red platform, but at the entrance of the Fire God Temple. Behind me was the main entrance with the words Fire God Temple hanging on it. Bayan was standing at the door, smiling at me. Her red wedding dress looked exceptionally bright in the dim environment. I was stunned. I clearly remembered that I had already walked into the Fire God Temple. I had even jumped onto the red platform and stood next to the red chair. But now, why was I suddenly at the entrance? Could it be that the silver-eyed man's appearance and our conversation had been a dream, just like what had happened in the sacrificial ceremony? I shook my head. I could clearly feel the dream in the sacrificial hall. Later on, I fainted and woke up after I opened my eyes. But now, I didn't even close my eyes during the whole process. How could it be a dream? I didn't believe it. I couldn't be bothered to talk to Bayan. I jumped through the door and quickly searched around. In the end, I found the room that I had stayed in with Bayan for a few days, but I didn't find the red platform or the red chair. Bayan had already followed me here. I turned around and asked her anxiously, "When did you come? Did you see the silver-eyed man? Do you see that scarlet chair?" Chapter 392. Even Tao Wu didn't see it. Was the appearance of the silver-eyed person really just a dream? I heaved a sigh of relief. I hadn't seen him for more than half a year and had just met him. It wouldn't be good for me to do anything else in front of Tao Wu, so I could only put the matter of the silver-eyed man aside. I smiled at Tao Wu and said, "I was supposed to come over a while ago, but I ran into some trouble and delayed it until now." Tao Wu looked at me quietly and smiled. She shook her head and said, "This is my home and also my husband's home. It doesn't make much of a difference to come back a few days earlier or later." She was still so considerate. I couldn't forget the guilt of not keeping my promise. I said apologetically, "It doesn't make much of a difference, but I still made you wait for so many days in vain." Tao Wu shook her head again. "It's fine. I've lived in seclusion in this cave for 1,000 years. Half a year has passed in a flash, and it's not much different from one day. Husband, you don't have to blame yourself." Hearing her say that, I couldn't take it to heart and couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Living in seclusion for 1,000 years. It didn't sound like much, but in reality, it was such a cruel word. I would go crazy if I stayed here alone for 3 to 5 days in such a cold and empty cave. I couldn't imagine how sad and helpless Tao Wu must have been to live alone for 1,000 years. However, why did she want to live here alone for 1,000 years? Previously, I had asked Tao Wu about her identity and why she was staying here, but she had rejected me, saying that it wasn't the right time to tell me yet. This time, even the silver-eyed person said that it was the right time. Was it time to tell me about Tao Wu's background? Thinking of this, I hurriedly asked what was on my mind. Tao Wu was stunned and didn't directly answer my question. Instead, she stared at me in a daze. After a while, she asked in a probing tone, "Husband, do you still not know my identity?" I was confused by her question and shook my head. "You haven't told me. How would I know?" Tao Wu didn't seem surprised by my answer, but her expression showed a hint of disappointment. She turned her head to the side and sighed. "Since husband hasn't remembered my identity, it proves that the time hasn't come." Hearing her words, I patted my head in annoyance. Nangong was like this, Silver Eye was like this, even Lao Ai was like this. They all knew something about me, but I didn't. Furthermore, they didn't want to tell me, they just had to wait for the right time. We are all cultivators, so of course I know there are many taboos in many things, and I understand them very well. However, I still feel uncomfortable. I don't care who I am, and I don't care what mission they're carrying. Isn't it better to be honest and open about everything? Like now, he was solving a riddle step by step. It was too tiring. I didn't say these words directly, but my face revealed a bit of displeasure. Perhaps Lao Ai sensed it, and her voice suddenly became apologetic. She hesitantly said, "Husband, I didn't mean to deceive you, it's really. Heaven's will is hard to defy. There are some words that should not be spoken before the time is right. Once spoken, it will be a disaster for both you and me." So I smiled wryly and interrupted her. I nodded and said, "You don't need to apologize. I understand. Although the 5 flaws and 3 imperfections are taboo for people of the unorthodox path, it's also a warning for true cultivators like us. The stronger you are, the greater the restriction of the rules of the heavenly path. Why would I blame you? I'm just a bit impatient. It's fine as long as you don't mind." Bayan smiled gently. "Of course I don't mind." After not seeing each other for half a year, I vaguely felt that Lao Ai and I were somewhat estranged. However, she didn't seem to feel that way. Instead, she behaved more naturally and familiarly in front of me. Her smile, which was rarely seen in the past, now hung on her face all the time. Her gaze towards me was also filled with enthusiasm. Under her lead, the slight estrangement in my heart immediately vanished. As I spoke, I followed her to the stone bench in the room and sat down. While we were chatting, Lao Ai suddenly asked about Tong Tong, asking me if Tong Tong was feeling better. Only then did I remember that Tong Tong had admired Red Shadow for a long time. She had been nagging me to ask her to come out and talk to Sister Red Shadow the next time I came. As I thought of this, I hastily took out the jade bracelet. After a few seconds, Tong Tong's figure flashed and directly appeared in front of me. After glancing at me, she turned her head and fixed her gaze on Red Shadow. "Sister, are you the Sister Red Shadow that brother mentioned?" Tong Tong blinked her big eyes and asked. Lao Ai was obviously stunned, but she quickly reacted. She first glanced at me before nodding at Tong Tong. "That's right. Are you Tong Tong?" Tong Tong quickly nodded and jumped to Lao Ai's side. She pulled her arm and happily said, "Brother said that it was all thanks to Sister's help that I was able to wake up this time." Lao Ai shook her head. "It was my husband who asked me to save you. You should thank him." I didn't know why, but Lao Ai's voice was somewhat cold and the smile on her face had disappeared. As she spoke, she turned her head and glanced at me. I couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed. Although there wasn't anything between me and Tong Tong, I had bad thoughts about her last night. Looking at Lao Ai's cold expression, I had a feeling that I had been caught in the act. Tong Tong was a simple-minded person and didn't notice Lao Ai's expression. She still clung to her and said with a smile, "Of course I have to thank brother, but I also have to thank sister. You didn't just save me last time. You also saved me once when I had just moved into the jade bracelet." Lao AI slightly frowned. She seemed to find it strange. She asked, "Previously?" Tong Tong nodded. "Yes, but sister didn't wear red clothes at that time. You wore white clothes." Lao AI's expression suddenly changed. She turned her head and stared at Tong Tong. She didn't speak for a long time. Tong Tong was puzzled by her gaze. She finally stopped talking and avoided Lao AI's gaze in fear. She turned her head and timidly glanced at me. At this time, I also remembered that Tong Tong and I had almost lost our lives in Professor Deng's hand. I was puzzled and asked Lao AI, "Yes, that was 6 or 7 years ago. At that time, I was fighting with a ghost owner and almost lost my life. A figure suddenly came out of the jade bracelet and drove away that person. She saved Tong Tong and my lives. At that time, my eyes were injured and I couldn't see anything. I heard from Tong Tong that the figure was also a woman wearing white clothes. Was it you?" Hearing my question, Lao AI finally spoke. She shook her head. "It wasn't me." Sure enough, it wasn't Lao AI. I was surprised and asked, "Was there someone else in the jade bracelet?" Lao AI shook her head again. "There was no one else in the jade bracelet." I was stunned. There was no one else in the jade bracelet, and the figure that appeared last time wasn't Lao AI. What was going on? I looked at Lao AI suspiciously as I didn't understand what she meant. At this time, Lao AI also looked at me with a trace of sadness in her eyes. I was even more puzzled. What was going on? After a long moment of silence, Lao AI finally moved her eyes away from my face and said softly, "Husband, can you lend me the jade bracelet for a while?" I nodded and handed the jade bracelet to her. "This jade bracelet is yours. If you want to use it, you can take it. You don't need to ask me." Lao AI took the jade bracelet and didn't say anything. She just stared at the jade bracelet for a long time. Finally, she lifted her head and asked me, "Husband, how long will you stay this time?" Hearing her question, I smiled. "This time, I can stay longer. I won't leave for a while." I thought that Lao AI would be happy to hear this news, but she didn't smile. Instead, she sighed. Before I could ask, Bayan said, "I have something to do. If my husband can stay here for a long time, why don't you wait for me here for a few days? After I finish that thing, I'll come back and reunite with my husband." Chapter 393. I opened my mouth, wanting to stop her and ask her what she was going to do. However, I hesitated, feeling that something was wrong. While I was hesitating, Bai had already drifted away, disappearing into the darkness around the corner in front of me. After she left, I suddenly remembered that Lao AI had previously said that she couldn't leave this underground palace. Why did she suddenly say that she was going to do something this time? Could it be that she had found a way to leave the underground palace? With that thought in mind, I glanced in the direction that Lao AI had left. I vaguely remembered that it wasn't an exit, but a deeper part of the underground palace. It seemed that what she was going to do was inside this underground palace. I was somewhat worried. In the past, I had thought that Lao AI was extremely powerful. However, this trip to the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum had broadened my horizons. I had seen many powers that were far beyond mine, and even beyond Lao AI's. In addition, the silver-eyed person that I had seen in my half-conscious state might still be here. Thus, after thinking for a while, I decided to follow Lao AI to take a look. She didn't look well when she left. If something were to happen, I would regret it. After making up my mind, I asked Tong Tong to wait here while I hurried in the direction Bayan had gone. I was somewhat familiar with the paths in the Fire God Temple, so I walked quickly. However, after walking for more than 10 minutes, I still couldn't find Lao AI at a fork in the road in front of me. For such a large building, once you took the wrong turn, you would be heading in the opposite direction. I had no choice but to stop and search around, wanting to see if I could find any traces of Lao AI. In the end, after searching for a long time, I couldn't find even the slightest clue. I couldn't determine which path Lao AI had taken. I sat down on a stone bench at the fork and pondered for a while. Just now, Lao Ai had told me to wait for a few days. It was obvious that she would need a lot of time. Judging from the current situation, she shouldn't be leaving this underground palace. Although this underground palace was large, it would take at most a few hours to walk back and forth. It definitely wouldn't take a few days. From this, I could deduce that she would need to spend a lot of time on what she wanted to do. A task that required a lot of time was either extremely troublesome or extremely dangerous. After analyzing the situation, I became even more anxious. I wandered around the three-forked road for 2 hours. In the end, I checked the time. It was already night time. I was worried that something bad would happen to Tong Tong if he stayed there alone. Begrudgingly, I went back the way I had come. When I turned around, Tong Tong was just as I had expected. She was standing at the door of the room, looking in my direction. Her eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. When she saw me, she heaved a sigh of relief. The worry in her eyes instantly disappeared. She ran to my side, grabbed my arm, and asked, "Brother, did you find Sister Red Shadow?" I rubbed her head and shook my head. "No, but she lives here all year round. There shouldn't be any problems. We don't have to worry too much. Let's stay here for now." Tong Tong was as obedient as ever. She nodded and said softly, "Okay." After returning to the room, Tong Tong naturally tidied up the bed and spread the blanket. Then, she softly said to me, "Brother, it's getting late. Let's go to bed." There was only one bed in Tong Tong's room. The last time I stayed here, I slept on the same bed with her. However, I was seriously injured at that time and my mind was constantly thinking about the outside world. Nothing happened between me and Tong Tong. Tong Tong told me last night that she liked to experience the feeling of sleeping. She wanted to sleep like a normal human every night. She wanted to sleep with me every night. It was a very humble wish. Tong Tong died when she was born. She had never experienced anything like a human. So, when she made this request, I couldn't refuse. But now, as I looked at Tong Tong's bed, I didn't feel good. Tong Tong was very pure. She didn't have any lust in her heart, but I was different from her. What's more, I did have a moment of lust last night. Although it was just a moment of absurdity, and I didn't put it into action, I couldn't pretend that it didn't happen. At this time, how could I calmly sleep on the same bed as Tong Tong? Even if it was just to fulfill her humble wish, I couldn't. My mind was in a mess. In the end, I didn't walk over. Instead, I smiled warmly and said to Tong Tong, "Brother has to make use of the time to cultivate at night. If you want to sleep, you can sleep by yourself." Tong Tong was stunned for a moment. She pouted and asked with a disappointed expression, But I want to hug brother to sleep." I tried to sleep alone in the jade bracelet, but that feeling was completely different from hugging brother to sleep. I couldn't bear to see her pitiful expression. If it was before, as long as Tong Tong showed this expression, my heart would break and I would be willing to do anything. But this time, I only hesitated for a moment before hardening my heart. It wasn't that I didn't dote on Tong Tong, but this was a matter of principle. I had to be fair to her. I smiled as I walked over to the bed and sat down. I held Tong Tong in my arms and rubbed her head. I explained to her warmly, "When brother promised you yesterday, I didn't think it through. Brother is an adult, and I'm already married to Red Shadow Jiejie. Sleeping can only be done between husband and wife. Other people can't. So, if you want to sleep in the future, brother can find you a super comfortable bed, but brother can't sleep with you." Tong Tong always had a kind and soft personality. After listening to my words, her mouth pouted and her pair of big eyes became misty, but she still said softly, "All right then, brother." After saying that, she seemed to be really sad and got up to leave the bed. I quickly pulled her back and said, "You sleep on the bed. I want to cultivate at night so I can sleep on the empty space over there." Tong Tong didn't refuse. She turned around and returned to the bed. Without saying anything, she lifted the blanket and got in. She turned her body sideways, leaving only her back view for me. I stood on the side and smiled bitterly. Although Tong Tong didn't show any signs of anger, she subconsciously showed some resistance towards me. I could only hope that she would understand in the future. I walked to the empty space in the middle of the room and sat down cross-legged. I closed my eyes and prepared to start meditating. However, even after a long time, I didn't completely enter the ethereal state. My mind kept thinking about whether Tao Wu would be in danger or the meaning of the silver-eyed person's words. Occasionally, I would think about Tong Tong. My thoughts ran wild until late at night. Suddenly, I heard some movement on the bed not far away. Just as I was about to turn around to look, Tong Tong's voice suddenly sounded. "Brother?" I opened my eyes and didn't turn around. I just asked warmly, "What's wrong?" Tong Tong said softly, "I have a question to ask you." "Okay, go ahead." Tong Tong remained silent for a while before she spoke again in a soft voice. "Does it mean that only husband and wife can sleep together?" I instantly smiled bitterly. Tong Tong was still brooding over this matter. My heart ached slightly, but I couldn't help but harden my heart. I immediately replied without any hesitation, "That's right. Only husband and wife can sleep together. Others can't." "Oh." Tong Tong's voice didn't have the disappointment from before. She just replied softly and then didn't say anything else. I waited for a while. After confirming that Tong Tong didn't say anything else, I let out a breath and prepared to continue meditating. However, just as I closed my eyes, Tong Tong's voice suddenly sounded again. Then, "Brother, can Tong Tong marry brother in the future?" I hadn't even finished exhaling when I heard Tong Tong's words. My breathing stagnated and I started coughing. It took a long time for me to stop. This time, I simply turned around and walked to the side of the bed. I looked at Tong Tong, who was lying on the bed and looking at me with her big eyes. I said to her solemnly, "Everyone can only have one wife. Brother has already married Sister Red Shadow. He can't marry anyone else in the future. So, you can't marry brother." After saying that, I extended my hand and gently stroked her hair. My voice became gentler as I said, "Moreover, you are brother's sister. How can you be brother's wife?" Chapter 394. A faint sobbing sound came from the quilt. In this silent night, I could hear it through the quilt. Eventually, Tong Tong was hurt. I stood by the bed and reached out my hand to comfort her. However, I didn't do anything. I just sighed. Tong Tong was born in heaven. Although she had become a ghost, she had experienced the same growth as a human. However, she wasn't a human. She had experienced the growth of her body, but she hadn't experienced the growth of her mind. This time, it was the growth of her mind. I quietly left the bed and returned to the empty space. I continued to meditate and cultivate. This time, I didn't know why, but the magic barrier in my heart disappeared. I didn't have any distracting thoughts. I easily entered the ethereal state and began to absorb the black smoke in my body. Slowly and steadily, my shaman energy grew. My shaman energy circulated 3 times in my body. When I opened my eyes, it was the next morning. I got up to check Tong Tong. However, as soon as I turned my head, I saw the little zombie sitting not far from me. He opened his big eyes and looked at me. From his expression, it seemed he had been staring at me for a long time. I felt strange. Ever since the little zombie had come out of the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty 2 days ago, he had become very strange. His spirit hadn't developed yet, and he wasn't good with words. Now, he was even quieter. For the past 2 days, he had been quietly following me. He didn't say a word. At first glance, he didn't look like a zombie at all. Perhaps the little zombie felt my gaze, but he finally moved. He blankly turned his head to the side and didn't look at me anymore. I was puzzled. I walked over to him and asked him if he was hurt. The little zombie shook his head. He didn't want to talk to me. He even closed his eyes. The little zombie was different from Tong Tong and the snake spirit. The snake spirit and Tong Tong had stayed by my side for a very long time. The snake spirit could communicate with me through the ink dragon seal on my body. They were like my closest friends. They could communicate with me if there was anything. They couldn't be more familiar with each other. As for the little zombie, although he had been by my side for some time, I still felt a sense of unfamiliarity with him. It wasn't because the little zombie was cold and didn't want to communicate with me, but because the little zombie was very special. He was a zombie. Although he could talk, he didn't have any intelligence. He needed to go through a special awakening ceremony to gain intelligence. For a long time, I haven't opened his spirit, mainly because this kind of creature is very special. Without opening his spirit, he is the best carrier of yin qi. I even read in a Taoist book that after reaching the yang spirit phase, I can practice a special kind of cultivation method that can separate a part of my yang spirit and place it in the body of a corpse to cultivate a doppelganger. This was the reason why zombies were so precious and special. After awakening, a zombie would possess intelligence and self-awareness, thus becoming an independent entity. It could no longer be used as a carrier of yin qi, nor could it cultivate any clones. As we had been together for a long time, I had some feelings for the little zombie. I didn't reject the idea of opening his spirit. However, I still had a selfish thought in my heart. I thought that I might need to use him in the future. That was why I kept delaying it day by day. The path of cultivation was cruel. Cultivators didn't want to let go of any method to increase their cultivation base. It wasn't just because of selfishness. More importantly, it was because they didn't feel safe. Ordinary people might think that the stronger they were, the safer they would feel. However, the fact was that the stronger they were, the more they knew how small they were. I was no exception. After thinking for a long time, I couldn't make up my mind. I shook my head and didn't want to think about it anymore. I turned around and walked to the bed. When I reached the bed, I lowered my head and saw that Tong Tong was still under the quilt. She looked the same as last night. I thought that she was still angry. However, before I could say anything, Tong Tong lifted the quilt and jumped up from the bed. She giggled and asked me about my cultivation progress. Her face didn't look as aggrieved as last night. I was stunned, but I quickly smiled. Although I wasn't sure if she had thought it through, at least I could confirm that she hadn't changed. She was still that kind and cute Tong Tong. I rubbed her head and chatted with her for a while. Then, I brought her and the little zombie to walk around the Flame God Temple. The Flame God Temple wasn't small. As I walked around with Tong Tong, I looked around the place again. Just like last time, I didn't see the fat boy's father. I didn't know if he was still here. The day passed by quickly. After nightfall, there was still no news of Tao Wu. Tong Tong didn't mention that I was going to sleep with her. She obediently lay on the bed alone. I continued to sit cross-legged in the middle of the room. That night, after the magic energy in my body had revolved a few times, I sat there and didn't hurry to cultivate. I took out the sword case that Nangong had given me and thought about what had happened. There were two main questions that were troubling me. The first was the people around me, such as Nangong. What was their motive, or what was their conspiracy? The second was my identity. The first question had been bothering me for a long time. Originally, I thought I had found the answer after I understood the nature of the battle between the witches. However, after the Yinshang royal tomb, I realized that what I had previously thought was only a part of the answer. The real answer might be much more complicated than I had imagined. Let alone the others, I couldn't understand the sword case that I was holding in my hand. This was the Xianyuan sword. Although I didn't know the power of this ancient Huaxiao divine weapon, I could imagine it. If this sword was real, Nangong would be invincible with this sword. Why would he give it to me? What he was after wasn't just the battle between the witches. The second question was something that I had discovered during my trip to the Yinshang royal tomb. No matter if it was the murals or statues in the royal tomb, or the illusions that I had experienced in my half-asleep state, they all showed that I had an extraordinary past life. Of course, the term previous incarnation was just a saying that I could think of. It only represented a relationship. Whether or not it was a real previous incarnation, I wasn't sure at the moment. Originally, I was certain that the me on the murals and statues was the ancestor of the Shang dynasty. His name was Shang-Chi. However, after seeing the silver-eyed man, everything was overturned. He admitted that he was Shang-Chi, but he looked different from me. Moreover, he called me Imperial Father. This term completely confused me. Even though the term Royal Father had an ancient aura to it, it wasn't foreign to anyone. It should be how the princes in ancient times addressed their father, the emperor. But why would the silver-eyed people address me like that? I had an absurd and unimaginable feeling in my heart. I was confused. Originally, I planned to wait for Lao Ai to return and ask her about the silver-eyed man in detail before thinking about this matter. However, Lao Ai didn't return for 2 days. Nothing happened during the long night. I couldn't help but make wild guesses on my own. While thinking about these 2 questions, I unintentionally took out the piece of paper that Nangong had left on the sword box and read it again and again. Yellow Emperor, son of Xiaohao. He took the power of primal chaos and cultivated his own origin. His brother Shinnong created the mountain and sea realm. Monster Emperor Jun invaded the human world. Xianyuan and Shinnong joined hands to resist. Monster Emperor Jun secretly invaded the mountain and sea realm. Shinnong was no match for him, so he turned into mist and sealed the world wall. Monster Emperor Jun obtained the power of primal chaos in the mountain and sea realm. Later, he borrowed the bloodline of Shinnong's daughter to escape alone and invade the human world. Xianyuan was no match for him and died. Gao Xian borrowed the power of Xianyuan's sword to fuse with Monster Emperor Jun. His descendants took the power of the primal chaos of the world and weakened the power of the Monster Emperor. In the Zhou dynasty, King Wen made a divination. Monster Emperor Jun and Gao Xian died. The disaster of the human world was eliminated and civilization began to flourish. I didn't know how many times I read it. Suddenly, a thought popped into my head. That day I had checked on my phone. Shang-Chi was the son of Gao Xian's Emperor Ku. If the word Imperial Father was referring to my father, then from the way the silver-eyed people addressed me, I should be Gao Xian's Emperor Ku. Although the ancestor of the Shang dynasty was Shang-Chi, Emperor Ku was Shang-Chi's father. From a certain perspective, it made sense to call Emperor Ku the ancestor of the Shang dynasty. If that was the case, everything seemed to make sense. The piece of paper that Nangong had given me recorded that Emperor Ku and Monster Emperor Jun had a bloody battle. In the end, they had fused into one. If that was the case, the statue that was worshipped in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty should be Emperor Ku. Or, it should be the fusion of Emperor Ku and Monster Emperor Jun. It could also explain why the statue was half human and half beast. If Monster Emperor Jun was called Monster Emperor, then his true form was a beast covered in fur. And Gao Xian had used the Xianyuan sword to do all of that. Chapter 395. Ever since Xiao Jin had given me the dark green bead for no reason, I had my doubts. Later on, Nangong suddenly appeared and helped me bring the snake spirit back. He also provided me with great help. I knew that there was a huge conspiracy surrounding me. I used to think that this conspiracy was man-made. Someone wanted to use me to achieve their goal. I guessed that it was Nangong or the old president. I even guessed that it was my previous incarnation. Until now, I still didn't know what this conspiracy was. However, I understood one thing. This conspiracy wasn't man-made. It was fate. There wasn't any light in the underground palace, but cultivators were very sensitive to the wisp of purple air at dawn. As I felt that the sky was getting brighter, I opened my eyes and exhaled the foul air that had accumulated in my abdomen for the entire night. I stood up from the ground. Just like last night, the little zombie was still waiting for me. His two big eyes stared at me. His face was dull, and I couldn't see through his thoughts. I walked over and knocked on his head. I had made up my mind. After I left the Fire God Temple, I would open his spirit. The little zombie's energy was very strong. After opening his spirit, his cultivation base would be at the later stage of the glorious memory realm. As long as I found a suitable cultivation technique for him, he would be able to reach the heavenly master realm in the future and become a great help to me. While I was thinking about this matter, Tong Tong heard my movements and jumped out of the bed and said to me with a smile, "Gidge, good morning." I nodded. I didn't feel awkward like I did with Tong Tong. Coincidentally, I thought about the little zombie's cultivation. I asked Tong Tong, "Have you been cultivating lately? How's your cultivation base?" Tong Tong nodded proudly. He raised his left hand in front of his chest and extended his index finger. Immediately, a long whip of black air surged out from his fingertip. The most magical thing was that the long whip of black air constantly flashed with silver lightning. The righteous aura of the sky thunder and the extreme aura of the energy mixed together. A vacuum zone suddenly appeared around the long whip of black air. Due to the close distance, the vacuum zone's strong suction force caused my clothes to flutter continuously. I felt as though I was about to fall forward. I had to use the shaman energy in my body to barely resist the suction force. My eyes instantly lit up. Previously, when Tong Tong had just woken up, I noticed that she had absorbed the power of the heavenly lightning into her body. It was just that she wasn't able to control it at that time and could only barely prevent herself from being harmed by the heavenly lightning. I never expected that she would be able to completely control the heavenly lightning in just a few days. In terms of metaphysics, this was completely impossible. Tong Tong, as a heavenly child, was born with extremely powerful Qi, so much so that she could even surpass the natural chasm of life and death. She could still grow and develop with the body of a dead spirit, but everything in the world had the principle of mutual promotion and restraint. The upright and pure yang heavenly thunder was her nemesis. No matter how powerful she was, under the pure yang power of the heavenly thunder, she could only turn into ashes. This was the magical part. When Tong Tong was struck by the heavenly lightning, she had turned into a energy silkworm cocoon to save her life. Later, she had used the black fluid that Bayan had given her to restore her origin little by little. No one had expected that during this process, Tong Tong could fuse the heavenly lightning with her own energy, creating a special heavenly thunder energy. According to legends, after reaching the heavenly master realm, all cultivators could find their own Tao. This Tao was the same as the path. For example, the members of the Lu family had cultivated the Lu family's magical seal since they were young. Lu Xiang's Tao was in his magical seal. Another example was Zhang Kanwan. His teacher was Wen Shan's disciple, and he cultivated righteous energy. His righteous energy was his Tao. And now, Tong Tong's heavenly thunder energy was her Tao. Based on this, Tong Tong's current cultivation base should be very close to the heavenly master realm. To confirm this, I asked Tong Tong to use the heavenly thunder energy to attack me. At first, Tong Tong didn't want to. After I had explained to her the meaning of this competition, she finally nodded. She reluctantly wielded the whip that contained the heavenly thunder energy and aimed it at me. Since the goal was to test Tong Tong's cultivation base, I didn't dodge. I took the 5 astral steps and urged the shaman energy in my body to resist the whip. However, as soon as the whip touched my shaman energy, it smashed my shaman energy. Although the whip vanished, the power of the heavenly thunder didn't vanish. It continued to spread toward me. I was startled. I hurried to take the 6 astral steps of the 9 astral steps to block the power of the heavenly thunder. After this competition, I had a new understanding of Tong Tong's cultivation base. At first, I thought that her cultivation base was at the same level as mine. But now, it seemed she was stronger than me. The 9-star Heavenly Dipper 6 steps was basically the strongest power I could use right now, but the result was only on par with the whip that Tong Tong casually lashed out with. If she combined the power of the heavenly lightning with the divine power of the art of transcendence, it would be hard to say if I would be her opponent. It seemed Tong Tong was closer to the heavenly master realm than I was. I hurried to ask Tong Tong, "Have you completely fused with the power of the heavenly thunder?" Tong Tong shook her head and put away the whip. She smiled and said, "Not yet. I've just absorbed all the heavenly thunder in my body. I can't absorb the other heavenly thunder for the time being. When I absorb the heavenly thunder in my body, I have a vague feeling that when I can absorb the heavenly thunder outside my body, I will have completely fused with the heavenly thunder," Tong Tong said thoughtfully. After listening to her, I felt gratified. Tong Tong's feeling was a kind of comprehension that cultivators had. This feeling couldn't be wrong. At first, I was just guessing, but now I could confirm that as long as Tong Tong fused with the heavenly thunder, she would reach the heavenly master realm. Now that the snake spirit had reached the heavenly master realm, as long as she cultivated the transformation technique, she could end her closed-door training. If Tong Tong reached the heavenly master realm, I would have 2 heavenly master experts by my side. When I reached the heavenly master realm, I could join hands with Tong Tong and the snake spirit. Although I couldn't say that I could fight against the Yang God heavenly master, at least I would have the ability to protect myself. Now that I had become the Lu family's mortal enemy, the 18 heavenly masters who had died in the Yinshang King's tomb could all be blamed on me. I could only hide here and drag out an ignoble existence. Although it was safe to hide here, and Nangong Tong said that he would bring me to an absolutely safe place, it was better to rely on myself than to rely on external forces. I couldn't hide like this forever. Originally, I thought that I would have to cultivate to the Yang God heavenly master realm to have the power to protect myself. However, with the help of Tong Tong and the snake spirit, I shouldn't have to wait that long. With the help of the black energy in my body, my cultivation had stabilized at the glorious knowledge 6 stars. It wouldn't take too long. As long as I could digest some of the black energy in my body, it wouldn't be a problem for me to successfully reach the glorious knowledge 7 stars. After reaching the glorious knowledge 7 stars, whether or not I could become a heavenly master depended on fate. If fate was right, it would be normal to become a heavenly master overnight. Originally, I wasn't sure that I could definitely reach the heavenly master realm, but now I was basically sure that I was the reincarnation of Emperor Ku, an ancient sage. How could I not have the fate to reach the heavenly master realm? Thinking about this, the negative emotions that had arisen from pondering over the conspiracies surrounding me instantly dissipated, and my mood became carefree once again. Of course, carefree was one thing, but Bai Tong had already been gone for 2 days. I was still very worried about her situation. After exchanging pointers with Tong Tong, I cultivated for another half a day in the house. In the afternoon, I told Tong Tong and the little zombie to stay in the house, while I followed the path that Bai Tong had taken that day. Since there was a 3-way intersection in front of me and I didn't understand the situation, I naturally couldn't just randomly choose a path and barge in. The reason why I came over again was just to sit at the 3-way intersection and wait to slightly ease the anxiety in my heart. Chapter 396. I smiled and took 2 steps forward. Just as I was about to call out to her, I vaguely saw that there was someone following behind her. Seeing this person, I was shocked. I couldn't say the words that were at the tip of my tongue. My mouth and eyes widened at the same time. I was extremely shocked. This person was Lin Oching, the fatty's father. I had come to Fire God Temple twice, and every time, I would search the places that I could go, but I didn't find any traces at all. Who knew that he would suddenly appear now? Uncle Lin and Bai and were really fast. In just a short while, they reached me from the fork in the middle. Only then did I react. I didn't bother to ask about Uncle Lin's situation, and hurriedly asked the fatty's father, Uncle Lin, why are you here? I came to look for you twice in the past 2 years, but I didn't find anything. In my anxiousness, I couldn't even speak properly. The fatty's father was still the same as before, with a face full of worry. He didn't seem to find anything strange when he saw me. He just frowned slightly and asked softly, You came here to look for me? Then, he shook his head and continued, Back then, I came here to look for Hu Zi. I couldn't find any traces of him for a few months, so I left. Why did you come here to look for me? His reply stunned me. He searched for the fatty for a few months, then he left? I had a ridiculous feeling. Back then, the fatty and I thought that his father would definitely be trapped here again if he entered Fire God Temple again. Who knew that he would come out by himself? But thinking about it, since the fatty's father could come out the first time, it made sense for him to come out the second time. Back then, the fatty and I were so focused on coming here to save his father that we didn't think about this at all. However, I still had a question in my heart. The fatty had slept in Fire God Temple for a year. During that time, the fatty's father couldn't find him, so he barged into Fire God Temple anxiously. But since he went out by himself, why didn't he find the fatty? Just as I was about to ask again, I suddenly remembered that the fatty's father had said that he had searched for a few months in Fire God Temple, and only left after he couldn't find him. Thinking about it, it seemed that the two of them had missed each other's times. When the fatty's father left, the fatty and I had already separated again. I didn't know what happened after that. It was a freak combination of factors. I smiled and didn't mention it anymore. Instead, I asked him, Uncle Lin, did you go to find Hu Zi after you left? When I was with Hu Zi, he was really worried about you and wanted to come here to find you. Lin Oching nodded. After I left here, I heard that Hu Zi was still in the Kaifeng Zhanshuan sect, so I went to Kaifeng to meet him. This should have happened after I was attacked by the Masters of the Metaphysics Society. I had no contact with Hu Zi after that. I didn't know about it. However, it was a good thing that the father and son had reunited. Fatty wouldn't have to be so paranoid all day. I was just asking casually, but the fatty's father's face darkened. He looked at me with an unfriendly expression. I came here to find you. Hu Zi was doing well in the Fire God Temple, but the day before yesterday, the people of the Metaphysics Society and Mount Longhu went to Fire God Temple. They said that you killed the president of the Metaphysics Society, Lu Ziang of the Lu family, and Celestial Master Zhang's younger brother. They wanted to interrogate Hu Zi about your whereabouts. As he said that, the fatty's father's face darkened. He looked at me with his dim yellow eyes and continued, At first, it was only the Metaphysics Society and Mount Longhu. They could barely suppress Jinren Guan, but later on, the people of the Taoist Association and the Buddhist Association also came and said that you killed the president of the Taoist Association and the senior monk of the Buddhist Association. Jinren Guan couldn't handle it anymore and had to hand Hu Zi over. Hu Zi didn't know about your situation, so how could he explain it to those people? I tried to think of a way to save Hu Zi, but the people of the metaphysics world seemed to have gone crazy. I couldn't find a chance. Third baby, tell Uncle Lin the truth. Did you really kill that many celestial masters? Lin Oching's words made my face change again. When I had escaped from Anyang, I had guessed that the forces of the metaphysics world had misunderstood me. There hadn't been any news in the past 2 days, so I thought that the metaphysics world hadn't gone crazy. However, from what Lin Oching had said, it seemed that the people of the metaphysics world were crazier than I had imagined. They had even found the fatty. What should I do? I didn't answer his question but asked about the fatty's current situation. Lin Aching shook his head. The situation isn't good. After the people of the Metaphysics Society captured the fatty, they didn't let him go. They even tortured him. He didn't have any other choice, so he came back to find me. The fatty's father knew a little about the relationship between me and the Fire God Temple. When he came to find me, he immediately came here and coincidentally met me. When I heard Lin Aching say that the fatty had been tortured by the people of the metaphysics world, I didn't feel good. Putting aside the fact that the fatty was a brother that I had grown up with, Lin Aching and the fatty, father and son, had gone through many hardships over the past few years. It wasn't easy for them to reunite and acknowledge each other, but something like this happened. After thinking about it, I felt sorry for them. Uncle Lin, what should we do now? The people of the metaphysics world are looking for me. If I follow you out, will they let go of the fatty? I asked anxiously. The fatty's father didn't say anything. He just sighed and looked like he couldn't bear it. In the end, he nodded. I won't hide it from you. Before I came, the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain came to find me. They said that as long as you show up, they will let Huzi go. If you don't show up in a week, they will kill Huzi. My heart instantly sank. Kill. The fatty and I had been playmates since we were young. We wore the same pair of pants for as long as I could remember. Now, he was going to lose his life for nothing because of me? I said without thinking, Uncle Lin, don't worry. I'll go back with you immediately. Just as I said that, before Lin Aching could react, Tao Wu suddenly said, No. I turned to look at Tao Wu and smiled wryly. I know you're worried about me, but no matter what, I can't just watch as something happens to the fatty, especially because he's my best friend. While I was waiting here, I was thinking about asking Bai on what she had been up to for the past few days. But now, I didn't even think about it. My mind was filled with thoughts of saving the fatty. Tao Wu's expression was very calm. She gently shook her head at me and said, Even though I don't know the situation, the power of the entire metaphysics world isn't something that you can handle alone. If you go out now, other than throwing your life away, what else can you do? Hearing the concern in Tao Wu's voice, I felt increasingly bitter. I sighed and said, Even if I throw my life away, I can at least save the fatty. This matter started because of me. If someone has to die, it can only be me. Tao Wu seemed to hear the determination in my words. After being silent for a while, she suddenly asked me, I remember you told me that you have an inky changing pearl? I was stunned and nodded subconsciously. Tao Wu continued, The inky changing pearl can conceal one's aura and change one's appearance. If you really want to save him, there's no harm in getting those people to let him go first. After that, you can use the inky changing pearl to escape. I didn't understand what she meant and asked, Use the inky changing pearl to escape? However, the inky changing pearl can only change one's appearance. Among the people waiting for me, there must be a large number of celestial masters. What's the use of changing one's appearance? Hearing my words, Tao Wu's expression was a little strange. She asked me to take the inky changing pearl out for her to see. Lao Ai held the shifting ink bead in his hand and looked at it for a while before he shook his head and said, This shifting ink bead is only a semi-finished product. As long as it is transformed into a finished product, it will have the effect of concealing one's aura. Even a heavenly master would not be able to see through it. Not only that, the shifting ink bead itself is a life-saving magic tool. Each shifting ink bead can only be used once to save one's life. Chapter 397. My heart was filled with excitement, but I immediately realized that Lao Ai was talking about the finished EMO bead, not the semi-finished one in my hands. No matter how powerful it was, it had nothing to do with me. I smiled wryly. When I got the EMO bead from the MO family, it was already a semi-finished product. Those people only gave me a week's time, they wouldn't have enough time to go to the Mo family to find the real EMO bead. I think we should forget about it, saving people is more important. I wasn't stupid, although I wanted to take the fatty's place and suffer. I didn't want to die in vain if I could save my own life. But Uncle Lin said that the people from Mount Longhu only gave me a week's time. He must have already spent 1 or 2 days on his way here. If we went to the descendants of the Mo family in Macau, even if we got the EMO bead, I'm afraid we wouldn't have enough time to save people. After saying that, I didn't care about the presence of the fatty's father and directly stepped forward to hug Lao Ai, saying goodbye to her. Lao Ai dodged to the side and avoided my hug, then without waiting for me to react, she directly reached out to me and asked, "Do you still have the profound Een liquid I gave you last time?" I was stunned, I didn't understand what she meant, and subconsciously took out the small bottle of profound Een liquid and handed it to her, replying, "There's still about half a bottle." Lao Ai nodded and softly said, "It should be enough." After saying that, she reached out again and said to me, "Take out your semi-finished EMO bead as well." After getting the EMO bead, she reached behind her and took out a small white porcelain bowl from who knows where. She directly threw the EMO bead inside, then opened the small bottle's cap and poured half of the profound Een liquid into the small porcelain bowl. After seeing her actions, I vaguely understood what she meant and asked in surprise, "You can turn this EMO bead into a finished product?" Lao Ai carefully placed the white porcelain bowl on the stone bench, then nodded to me, "Yes. I really guessed it." I immediately became excited, and said to Lao Ai with a grin, "That's great, why didn't you tell me earlier?" Lao Ai seemed to be angered by my words, glanced at me and replied snappily, "Who told you to be in such a hurry, getting ready to leave before I even finished talking? Where would I have the time to tell you?" The usually cold and silent Lao Ai suddenly made such a reproachful expression, it had a special charm, and I was momentarily dazed, unable to say anything for a long time. Thinking back, I realized that ever since I returned to the Fire God Temple, Swanee seemed to be completely different from before. In the past, when she spoke, she would be expressionless. Now that she was talking more, the liveliness in her expressions and words seemed to be getting stronger, as though she was slowly adapting to her surroundings. In the past, Lao Ai was noble and ethereal, like a fairy in a painting. Although I liked her very much, every time I looked at her, it was unreal. It was as if I was looking at a fairy in the sky. Even if she was my wife, I didn't dare to have the slightest thought of profaning her. But at this moment I suddenly felt that the distance between us had decreased by a lot. It wasn't just the distance between us, but the distance between us. She seemed to have suddenly descended from the clouds, and stood in front of me with a smile. In reality, she was indeed standing in front of me, and was extremely close to me. I didn't know what I was thinking, but I suddenly stretched my head out and kissed her on the cheek. At this moment, Lao Ai seemed to be preparing to say something, but after being suddenly kissed by me, her mouth instantly froze. The trace of hidden bitterness on her face instantly disappeared, and a crimson cloud floated onto her face, making her originally extremely beautiful look even more indescribable. Looking at her, I was intoxicated, and couldn't wait to pull her into my embrace. But since Lin Aching was still here, I didn't have the nerve to go over and hug Lao Ai, but I still looked at her with infatuation. Lao Ai wasn't as thick-skinned as me, and had already lowered her head. After staying silent for a while, she frantically picked up the white jade porcelain bowl that she had just placed on the stone bench, and passed it to my hand. Avoiding my gaze, she softly said, "As long as you soak it for a night, and use a drop of your blood to nourish it, this EMO pearl will become a real EMO pearl. We shouldn't stay here for long, let's head back first." After saying that, she turned around and quickly walked back to her residence. Seeing her suddenly reveal the appearance of a little girl, I was both happy and amused. Carrying the white jade porcelain bowl, I followed her with Lin Aching. This place wasn't far from Lao Ai's residence, and after walking for a while, We approached the stone room that she lived in. Right at this moment, Lin Aching, who had been standing next to me in silence, suddenly spoke. "Third baby." I was stunned, and stopped walking. I turned to look at Lin Aching's solemn face, thinking that he had most likely seen the scene of me kissing Lao Ai, and wanted to persuade me that humans and ghosts were different paths. Lin Aching was my elder, and he had watched me grow up. If he really wanted to persuade me, I really didn't know how to reply. While I was hesitating, Lin Aching finally spoke. He sighed. "Don't let her down." After saying that, he immediately lifted his foot and walked into the stone room in front of us. I was stunned on the spot, a little dumbfounded by his words. Lin Aching's cultivation base might not be as high as mine, but his knowledge of metaphysics was definitely not worse than mine. The saying that humans and ghosts walk different paths was a golden rule for us metaphysicians. Everyone knew that if a human and a ghost stayed together, they wouldn't have a good ending. I really didn't expect that Lin Aching would give his blessing to me and Hua. After my parents had passed away, I didn't have any relatives. Of course, I didn't regret marrying Lao Ai, and other people's opinions didn't matter to me. However, after seeing Lin Aching today, I was a little worried. But now, it seemed that Uncle Lin supported me and Lao Ai. The corners of my mouth curved into a smile, and I didn't worry anymore. I lifted my foot and walked into the stone room. Tong Tong was circling around Lao Ai, asking her where she had been these days. Lao Ai also smiled and talked to her. Seeing this, I heaved a sigh of relief. A few days ago, when Lao Ai left, her face didn't look right. I thought that she had something against Tong Tong. Now, it seemed that I was overthinking. The two of them smiled and talked to each other, and they looked like a pair of sisters. They couldn't be more intimate. Lin Aching stood next to the little zombie, frowning and gazing at him. I put down the porcelain bowl in my hand and walked to Lin Aching. When he saw me, he asked, "Did you raise this little zombie?" I nodded, but before I could answer, Lin Aching said, "It's strange. It looks like an ordinary raised zombie, but why is its energy so strong?" Hearing his words, I was slightly shocked. Ghouls were different from Tong Tong's heavenly birth ghost infant. Heavenly birth's miraculousness could be seen at a glance by those who had cultivated to a certain realm. However, ghouls were different, especially those that had yet to awaken their spirit. They looked no different from normal zombies. Even if a heavenly teacher were to casually look at them, he wouldn't be able to see any clues. It was also the reason why the heavenly masters hadn't paid attention to the little zombie in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. Lin Aching's cultivation base wasn't bad, but he hadn't reached the heavenly master realm yet. How could he see that there was something strange about the little zombie? I felt strange, but Lin Aching was someone I trusted. I didn't want to hide it from him. I smiled and answered, "He's not an ordinary raised zombie. He's a ghoul." "A ghoul?" Lin Aching was surprised. Then, he frowned. It's normal for a ghoul to have such a huge amount of energy. However, a ghoul's energy should be pure. However, I can smell an ancient aura from this little zombie. Something's not right. Ancient aura? Instinctively, I sniffed and couldn't help but laugh. I didn't know what Lin Aching meant. Lin Aching frowned and pondered for a while. He didn't want to dwell on this issue anymore. He shook his head and said, "Perhaps it's just my misperception. Let's not talk about this. Tonight, I will meditate outside the stone chamber. Tomorrow morning, when the e-ink bead is ready, we will depart. What do you think?" I had already made up my mind to save the fatty. I didn't have anything else to say, so I nodded. Lin Aching didn't say anything else and directly left. After he left, I went to the little zombie and sniffed him. Let alone the ancient aura, the little zombie was a strange creature. His entire body was clean, and I couldn't smell any strange smell. Looking at the little zombie, I was a little worried. It wasn't because of what Lin Aching had said, but because the little zombie had been behaving strangely these days. When he was with me, he kept staring at me. I asked him, but he didn't say anything. I didn't know what he was looking at. While I was thinking about the little zombie, Bayan came to me. I recalled her shy and beautiful appearance, and remembered that we were going to sleep together tonight. I suddenly felt a panicked and expectant feeling in my heart. However, my desire didn't last long. Bayan asked me, don't you think it's strange? I was surprised. What's strange? Bayan answered, this person came back to life here. I remember the last time he came here. From what you said, you haven't seen him since then. At that time, you didn't even enter the fire god temple. How did he know that you came here to avoid trouble? Moreover, he was so sure that you were here that he immediately came to find you. I was surprised. I was worried about the fatty's safety, so I didn't think about this. Chapter 398. I had experienced many schemes and betrayals in the past few years, so I couldn't help but have a heavy heart. After hearing what Tao Wu had said, my suspicions were planted in my heart. At the same time, I couldn't help but recall my suspicions towards the fatty. At that time, the Lu family and the Metaphysics Association had used the opportunity of Luoho Star's appearance to make use of Bai Chiwen to challenge me. They had verified my identity and wanted to kill me. The appearance of Luoho Star was the time to kill one's master. In the metaphysics world, cultivators of Dao Qi were unable to use Dao Qi, so they were unable to predict the time of the heavens. However, the fatty's divination was different from ordinary cultivators. His line of divination was the responsibility of divination, so he naturally wasn't afraid of killing his master. When Luoho Star appeared, the divination practitioner would have a special reaction. The fatty was with me at that time, so he knew the time of Bai Chiwen's challenge. However, he didn't tell me or even mention it. The fatty and I were childhood friends, so we had a good relationship. After escaping to the Flame God Temple, I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to suspect the fatty. I felt that there was a misunderstanding, so I wanted to explain it to him when we met again. Even so, there was still a thorn in my heart. The thorn wasn't deep, so I didn't mind it. However, after hearing what Tao Wu had said, everything seemed different. If the fatty really wanted to harm me, then now that he had been captured by the people of the metaphysics world, and Uncle Lin had asked me to rescue him, it was definitely a conspiracy. Just as my heart was in a mess, Tao Wu asked me again, "Husband, what do you think?" I shook my head and didn't reply. I lowered my head and paced around the room a few times. I still couldn't make up my mind, so I asked Tao Wu again, "How did you meet Uncle Lin? You said that you had something to do that day. What was it?" Tao Wu was slightly startled, but this time, she didn't hide it from me and quickly said, "There are some strange places in the Fire God Temple. At that time, I left in a hurry just to use that strange place to check if the white-clothed person that Tong Tong mentioned was really in the jade bracelet. As for Lin Oching, he was resurrected in that bizarre place. This time, when he entered the Fire God Temple again, he went there at the first possible moment, which was why he coincidentally met me." I nodded. Uncle Lin's encounter with Bai and was normal. There was nothing strange about it. Then, I asked Lao Ai if she knew the inside story of Lin Oching's resurrection. She shook her head. "You can't tell me about that strange place for now. When I reach the celestial timing realm, you can take me there to see." After asking for a long time, I couldn't find any evidence that Uncle Lin or the fatty had lied to me. I gritted my teeth and stopped struggling. No matter what, Fatty is still my brother. Even if he really betrayed me, I have to see it with my own eyes to believe it. Therefore, I have to go on this trip. After making up my mind, I discarded all other distracting thoughts and no longer let my imagination run wild. Lao Ai also didn't try to persuade me. She just gently urged me to sleep early. She said that it was getting late and that we would have to travel far tomorrow, so I had to rest well today. Hearing her mention sleep, my heart trembled slightly. However, I immediately suppressed that thought. Originally, I thought that I would have to stay here for a period of time. Lao Ai and I were already husband and wife in name, so it was only natural for us to be husband and wife. However, now that I had to go on an adventure again, I couldn't stay with her forever. Thus that thought faded. Thus, I went over and laid on the bed. Lao Ai didn't say anything. Just like when I was in middle school, she laid beside me gently. She didn't say anything and just silently accompanied me. Back then, facing Lao Ai, I was more or less afraid. Even though I could sleep normally after getting used to it, I was still on tenterhooks every night. Thinking back to that period of time, my heart was filled with warmth and nostalgia. Back then, I didn't know that Lao Ai's spirit body couldn't sleep at all. So, back then, she only accompanied me night after night, quietly watching me sleep. Perhaps it was because of this long period of companionship that I didn't have much resistance in my heart when she called me her husband. Thinking back to those things back then, I turned to look at Lao Ai, who looked exactly the same as back then. There was an inexplicable warmth in my heart. I couldn't help but reach out and embrace her. Lao Ai's body was as cold as back then, but I felt very warm. Hugging her, I closed my eyes and soon fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up the next day, Lao Ai was already standing by the bed with my coat in her hand. After I got off the bed, she gently helped me put on my clothes. Then, she handed the EMO bead to me. Smiling, she said to me, "Husband, the EMO bead has been refined." I took it and looked at it. The EMO bead, which was originally the size of a fist, was still black. However, its color was much deeper. There seemed to be a gray aura circulating inside, making it look somewhat gloomy. In addition, the EMO bead had shrunk by more than half. At this moment, it was only the size of a ping-pong ball. Lao Ai told me that the method to use the completed EMO bead was the same as the semi-finished EMO bead. It only needed to be driven by Dao Qi. However, the amount of Dao Qi needed was much more than before. I nodded and held the completed EMO bead. I circulated the Dao Qi in my body to give it a try. Lao Ai was right. I used the same amount of Dao Qi to drive the semi-finished EMO bead. In the end, the EMO bead didn't have the slightest reaction. I could only continue to pour in Dao Qi. Only after I had used up all of my Dao Qi did I faintly feel a slight tremble in the EMO bead. I lowered my head to take a look. The gray aura in the EMO bead had already filled the entire bead. Furthermore, it was constantly revolving within the bead, as though it would rush out at any moment. This time, I was a little dumbfounded. My Dao Qi had encountered a heavenly barrier. I could only stop at the 10th level of sealing acupoint, unable to step into glory of knowledge. With the miraculous EMO bead, it could only be driven by Dao Qi at the glory of knowledge realm. It was almost unimaginable. However, the problem was that the Dao Qi in my body was just a sliver away from reaching glory of knowledge. Even after exhausting all of my Dao Qi, I could only push the EMO bead to the critical point. Lao Ai stood at the side. She had clearly seen through my situation. She didn't ask any questions. She just smiled and passed the jade bracelet back to me. The Dao Qi to drive the EMO bead doesn't have to be poured in all at once. I can help you lock the Dao Qi in the EMO bead. After you use the True Dragon Vein in the jade bracelet to replenish your Dao Qi, you only need to pour in a small amount of Dao Qi to activate the EMO bead. From then on, you only need to borrow the True Dragon Vein in the jade bracelet to maintain the supply of Dao Qi. If you use the life-saving function of the EMO bead, you don't need to use the Dao technique to coordinate with it. All you need is a thought and the EMO bead will automatically activate. However, husband must remember that the life-saving function of the EMO bead can only be used once. After that, the EMO bead will no longer have this function. After saying that, she took the EMO bead. After forming a few hand seals, she passed it back to me. I took a look at it. Sure enough, there was a layer of Dao Qi circulating around the EMO bead. It seemed to be bound by some invisible power. It could only float around the EMO bead and was unable to dissipate. Lao AI naturally wouldn't lie to me, so I didn't try it again. I directly put the EMO bead and jade bracelet into my pocket. Afterwards, I asked her. Previously, I used the semi-finished EMO bead to change my appearance. However, I was recognized by a few people from the Metaphysics Association. If I change my appearance again, I'm afraid that I'll be in danger if I meet people from the Metaphysics Association. I don't know if the appearance of the completed EMO bead will be the same as before. Lao AI shook her head. Husband, don't worry. The semi-finished EMO bead will only change your appearance slightly. The completed EMO bead can change your appearance completely. Husband doesn't need to worry. This time, the last of my worries were gone. I laughed heartily and prepared to say goodbye to Lao AI. However, as the words reached the tip of my tongue, I couldn't maintain the smile on my face. I couldn't help but feel apologetic in my heart. Lao AI had been guarding the fire god temple all year round. She had lived the life of an ancient scroll. It wasn't easy for her to wait for me to come back. But after a few days I had to leave again. At that time, when I said that I would come back once every half a year, I didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. But after I really did it, I realized that it was actually a very cruel thing. The outside world had my own grievances. Thus, I couldn't completely break away from the outside world and return here. Lao AI was only a small part of my world. But to Lao AI, I was her entire world. I didn't know why Lin Aching had advised me not to let Lao AI down yesterday. But now, I couldn't help but have this thought in my heart. Chapter 399. Looking at Bayan, I moved my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. In the end, I could only apologize to her and promise her that I would come back as soon as I finished dealing with the matters outside. Bayan still smiled and said softly to me, "Husband, you don't have to be like this. I only hope that husband can be safe and happy outside. That's enough. As for the mundane matters, they will be dealt with one day. Husband, you don't have to be impatient." Her understanding made me feel ashamed. I couldn't help but hold her hand and softly said, "Bayan, you're so nice." Originally, this was just a display of my true feelings, but for some reason, the faint smile on Lao AI's face faded a little. Her eyes dimmed a little as she looked at me in a daze. After a long time, she sighed and said, "I only hope that my husband will remember my kindness in the future." There was a trace of resentment in her voice. I was surprised as I didn't know why she said that. When I was about to ask, Bayan pointed at the door and whispered, "Lin Aching is waiting for you. Don't let him wait too long." I turned around and saw Uncle Lin standing at the door. He was looking at us. With Lin Aching there, Bayan and I couldn't talk too much. I let go of her hand and said goodbye to her one last time before turning around and leaving. When I reached the door, Uncle Lin and the little zombie had been waiting for me for a long time. I called them and left. The Fire God Temple was located in the western border of Hubei. It wasn't far from Kaifeng, where the diviner faction was located. Uncle Lin was very anxious on the way. When we reached Shenangjia, he rented a car and took me and the little zombie to Kaifeng. On the way, I thought that when we arrived at the diviner faction, we would have to use the Mo bead's life-saving skill to escape from the people from Longhu Mountain. At that time, I wouldn't have time to take care of the little zombie. Thus, I planned to rent a car and take the little zombie back to the shop in Shenzhen. However, after I told the little zombie, he shook his head at me. I was surprised. The little zombie had always been ignorant and had never resisted my orders. What was wrong with him this time? Before I could figure it out, the little zombie pointed at the map on the bus. "Please take me to a place dozens of kilometers away from here. I'll wait for you there." I didn't understand. I frowned and thought for a while. "Where do you want to go?" The little zombie's face didn't reveal anything strange. He honestly replied, The inchi there is very rich. It's suitable for me to cultivate. I understood. Although the little zombie had an innate spirit body, no matter how good his innate aptitude was, he still needed to cultivate to increase his cultivation base. Ordinary zombies would come out to absorb the essence of the moon during the night of the full moon. The little zombie had been following me and hadn't cultivated much. It was normal for him to want to cultivate at this time. However, I was surprised that he could recognize the location on the map and accurately point out his actions. The little zombie hadn't awakened his spirit yet. He was already so smart before opening his spirit. What would happen after he opened his spirit? After thinking for a while, I finally nodded and agreed to the little zombie's request. Uncle Lin was very anxious. It was impossible for me to personally send the little zombie back to Shenzhen. Instead of forcing him to go back alone, it would be better to follow his wishes and let him stay here. I will come find him in the future. After making up my mind, I told Uncle Lin. He drove the car and headed in the direction the little zombie was looking for. 1 hour later, we arrived at our destination. After getting out of the car, I looked around. We were in a canyon. Not far from us was a lush and green forest. There was a long mountain range in the forest. It seemed the geomancy here was excellent. I looked around and didn't know if this place had a lot of Yin energy or not. However, I could see a wisp of true dragon energy. It was a good place for people who cultivated Tao energy to live. The little zombie didn't say goodbye to me. After getting out of the car, he pointed at the forest in front of us and said, "I'll wait for you in the forest ahead." Then, he didn't wait for my answer and walked into the forest. After the little zombie's figure disappeared, I looked around and memorized the location. Then, I turned to Uncle Lin and said, "Let's go." Afterwards, we drove for another 6 hours. It wasn't until the sky turned dark that we arrived at Mount Huangguanshan. Lin Aching didn't hurry to bring me to the Zhanxian sect. Instead, he stopped the car on the side of the road. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said to me with a solemn expression, "Third baby, there are at least 3 people from Mount Longhu that have the cultivation of a heavenly master. Although you have the EMO bead, you must still be careful. After you rescue my tiger, you must immediately leave if you find an opportunity." Before leaving, I had already thought about the pros and cons. Not only would I have to face the people from Mount Longhu, but I would also have to be on guard against the Lu family's revenge. I had personally killed Lu Ziang. I didn't know if the Lu family could accurately calculate my location like Lu Ziang had said, but at the very least, the Lu family definitely had the ability to detect my approximate location. At this moment, even without Lin Aching's reminder, I wouldn't let my guard down. I smiled and nodded to Lin Aching. "Uncle Lin, don't worry. There shouldn't be any problems here. However, after you leave with the fatty, you must run away immediately. If you can't, you two can go back and hide in the Fire God Temple." Lin Aching nodded and said, "Don't worry, Uncle Lin. There shouldn't be any problems here. After you leave with the fatty, you must run away immediately. If you can't, you two can go back and hide in the Fire God Temple." When I arrived at the mountain gate, I saw 2 Taoist priests wearing Taoist robes from Mount Longhu. When I saw them, I didn't feel nervous. Instead, I heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, the fact that the people from Mount Longhu were guarding this place proved that Uncle Lin didn't lie to me. It seemed that Bai-un and my previous suspicions were unnecessary. The car stopped in front of the mountain gate. Lin Aching and I didn't hesitate and opened the car door to get out. The people from Mount Longhu seemed to know that we were coming. The moment we got out of the car, the 2 Taoist priests walked over with vigilant expressions. After glancing at Lin Aching, their gazes fixed on me. "Joey?" I nodded and didn't say anything. The 2 Taoist priests' expressions clearly showed a trace of joy. One of them said that he had to go back to report and left excitedly. The other Taoist priest extended his hand and said faintly, "Follow me." Lin Acheng and I followed the Taoist priest up Mount Huangguan and arrived at the Tianyi Temple that we had visited before. The last time we came to the Tianyi Temple, there were only a few disciples from the Taoist sect wearing Taoist robes. This time, the entire Tianyi Temple was filled with Longhu sect disciples wearing yellow-brown scarves. They guarded every path. It was obvious that Mount Longhu had occupied the entire Taoist sect. We walked through the hall and entered the inner room. I lifted my head and saw the fat man sitting on the side of the hall. He was accompanied by 3 heavenly master Taoist priests, who were wearing primordial crowns on their heads and holding ivory jade tablets. There were 3 heavenly masters. Mount Longhu's power was indeed terrifying. 3 heavenly masters had just died in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty, and now they had sent another 3 heavenly masters. After entering the room, the fat man was the first to stand up. With an anxious face, he called out to me, "Third baby." He seemed to want to say something to me. However, before he could speak, a fat Taoist priest next to him waved his sleeve. The fat man's voice stopped abruptly. His face turned red, but he didn't make another sound. After stopping the fat man, the fat heavenly master turned his head and glanced at me. After sizing me up, he said, "You're Zhou Yi? Since you're here, why didn't you bring the key?" I was bewildered for a while before I understood what he meant by the key. After I understood, I was frightened. The heavenly masters in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty were all dead. Of course, the girl who looked exactly like Yi Piampian couldn't be brought back to Mount Longhu. No wonder Mount Longhu had mobilized such a large force to catch me. It turned out they didn't want to take revenge for the 3 heavenly masters. Their main purpose was to find that woman. Chapter 400. I turned to look at Uncle Lin as my mind raced. After a moment of silence, I lifted my head and said to the chubby heavenly master, "Of course, I can't bring that woman here directly. But don't worry. As long as you let Lin Hu go, I'll definitely hand her over." I was obviously just spouting nonsense, but that was the only thing I could say. If the people from Mount Longhu knew the truth, not only would they let the fatty go, they would probably kill me and the fatty to vent their anger. When Uncle Lin heard what I said, he was slightly surprised and turned to look at me. The chubby heavenly master's expression turned solemn as he asked me, "You hid her?" I shook my head. "You don't have to worry about that. Let him go first." I thought that the people from Mount Longhu wouldn't let the matter go so easily. However, the chubby heavenly master waved his hand and the fatty's body suddenly flew up and landed in front of Uncle Lin and me. Immediately after, the chubby heavenly master's voice was heard. "I can let him go first, but don't think that you won't dare. After Lin Hu leaves, if you don't hand over the key immediately, I guarantee that you'll wish you were dead." After saying that, I didn't know what he did, but the fatty, who was originally lying on the ground like a log, suddenly jumped up. He anxiously shouted at me, "Third baby, why did you come here? They won't let you go," and I. Before he could finish, Lin Acheng extended his hand and grabbed him. With a solemn expression, he said to me, "Third baby, I'll leave this place to you. Let's go first." After saying that, he didn't ask for Fatty's opinion. He pulled Fatty along and dashed outside. During the entire process, the Fatty seemed to be anxious to say something. However, he didn't know why, but when he opened his mouth, he couldn't make a sound, just like when he was being controlled by the chubby heavenly master. After Lin Acheng and the Fatty's silhouettes disappeared from the Tianyi monastery, the fat great heavenly master, who was sitting in the main hall, got up from his chair and leisurely walked in front of me. He casually knocked the jade tablet in his hand on the round pillar beside me. "Tell me, where is the exact location of the key?" I shook my head. "I'll tell you after they're safe." The chubby great heavenly master didn't get angry. He lifted his head to look outside the room. Then, he waved the jade tablet in front of me. Instantly, a gray screen appeared in front of me. Uncle Lin and the chubby man's silhouettes were displayed on it. The two of them had reached the entrance of Mount Huangguanshan and were hurrying to leave. No one from Mount Longhu had stopped them during the whole process. I watched as the two of them left Mount Huangguanshan. Then, they got into a car and sped away. When their figures disappeared, the chubby Great Heavenly Master waved the jade tablet in his hand again. The gray screen disappeared. The chubby Great Heavenly Master asked, "How was it? Can you tell me now?" I nodded and let out a breath. As I gathered the Tao Qi in my body into the E-ink pearl, I smiled at the fat master and said, "Actually, I don't know where that woman went. Not only that, but of the 18 masters in the Yinshang royal tomb, other than Lu Ziang, I didn't kill any of them. The deaths of the 3 masters from Longhu Mountain had nothing to do with me. If you believe me, then believe me. If you don't, then I can't do anything about it." After I said that, I didn't wait for him to react. I gathered all my Tao Qi and poured it into the shifting ink bead. Then, I quickly activated the shifting ink bead's life-saving ability. The 3 heavenly masters of Longhu Mountain were standing in front of me. Even though I was secretly using the EMO bead's special ability, I didn't dare to show the slightest neglect or delay. It could be seen that the fat heavenly master and the other 2 heavenly masters were unable to react to this sudden turn of events. They only stared at me in shock. After I activated the EMO bead's life-saving ability, my body rapidly faded. At the same time, there was an enormous force tearing at my body. When the 3 heavenly masters from Longhu Mountain saw this scene, the astonishment in their eyes rapidly turned into shock, followed by anger. The fat heavenly master seemed to have finally come to his senses. He slapped the jade tablet in his hand against his own chest. Immediately afterward, he spat out a mouthful of blood toward me. I had a bad premonition and tried to dodge to the side, but under the effect of the EMO bead, my body couldn't move at all. I could only stare blankly as the blood mist rained down on my head. Immediately after, I felt a tearing pain in my body. It was similar to the feeling I had when Nangong, Yi Pianpian, and Yi Yaolan had joined hands to send me to the Fire God Temple at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Association. I didn't know if it was because of the shifting ink bead or because of the fat heavenly master's mouthful of blood. After the tearing pain, my body became almost transparent. Immediately after, my vision went black and I fainted, just like the previous time. When I woke up, my body was aching so much that I couldn't open my eyelid. However, my vigilance made me clench my teeth and open my eyes. As I looked around, I tried my best to circulate the shaman energy in my body. Before I could feel the shaman energy in my body, I saw a figure in front of me. I was startled. Lao AI had told me that the shifting ink bead could teleport me to a random location 1,000 miles away. There was a lot of uncertainty. If I teleported to a dangerous place, with my current condition, it was hard to say whether I would be in danger or not. However, my fear didn't show too much. It immediately turned into astonishment. The figure in front of me was the little zombie. Just like before, he had a pair of big eyes. He stood next to me and gazed at me. At this moment, I finally felt the shaman energy in my body. After it had circulated through my body, I gradually regained some of my strength. I forced myself to get up from the ground and looked around. The surrounding scenery looked familiar. After thinking for a while, I recognized that it was the forest where I had dropped the little zombie off the bus. I gradually understood. The little zombie had asked me to drop him off here and told me that he would wait for me here. It wasn't because of the thick yin energy in this place. It was because he knew that I would come back here. However, the shifting ink bead's teleportation was random. Even Lao AI didn't know about it. How could the little zombie know about it? With great surprise, I didn't care if there were other dangers or not. I directly asked the little zombie. The little zombie shook his head. He didn't answer my question but pointed at me. "Where did you get the blood on your body?" I was bewildered. I didn't understand what he meant. However, I still told him what the fat heavenly master had done. After the little zombie heard this, his eyebrows furrowed. After muttering to himself for a while, he said, "That person most likely used a secret tracking technique. This bloodstain has his own imprint. Once you appear, he will immediately be able to sense your location." What? I was startled. I hurried to take off my clothes and throw them away. The little zombie shook his head. "The blood has already soaked your skin. What's the point of throwing your clothes away? Moreover, he must have already sensed your location. Even if you remove the blood, those people will catch up with you soon." The little zombie's face was serious. He didn't look like he was lying to me. However, I didn't understand what had happened to this quiet little zombie. I was surprised that he knew the map. But now, not only could he recognize the power of the fat heavenly master, but he could also analyze the situation for me. How could he still be the ignorant little zombie I knew? I was very skeptical. However, it wasn't the time to ask. I kept silent for a while, then asked the little zombie, "What should we do now?" He shook his head. "We can't remove the blood for the time being. We have to leave this place first. While we're leaving, I will think of a way to help you remove the blood. As long as we can remove the blood before they find us, we can shake them off. Otherwise, it's hard to say what will happen." Chapter 401. When we got out of the forest, we were in a car when we brought the little zombie here, so we weren't familiar with the surroundings. I looked at the verdant canyon outside and didn't know where to go. At this time, the little zombie opened his mouth again. He pointed to the left side where the terrain was slightly higher and said, "Go to the west. There are fewer people there, and the chances of escaping will be higher. Moreover, the Dao and Xian families, as well as the other sects of the Metaphysics Society, have ancestral lands close to the east. If they want to chase you, they will have to start from the east. It will take some time for them to chase you to the west. We can use this time to escape or hide." I was already numb to the little zombie's amazing performance, so I didn't ask any more questions. I just thought about what he had said and felt that it made sense. I nodded and agreed to his suggestion. Seeing that I had agreed, the little zombie didn't say anything else and prepared to head to the west. I hurriedly pulled him back and said, "We can't just run around like this. We have to find a place to hide. I think it's a good idea to run back to the Fire God Temple. What do you think?" I didn't know when I had made the decision, but I subconsciously took the initiative to discuss with the little zombie. The little zombie stopped. After listening to me, he immediately shook his head. "No, the bloodstains on your body haven't been removed yet. If we go back to the Fire God Temple now, we will only bring the people who want to kill you back with us. At that time, I'm afraid that the Fire God Temple alone won't be able to protect you." After listening to him, I panicked. Originally, my worst plan was to go back to the Fire God Temple. However, from what the little zombie had said, the bloodstains on my body were extremely hard to deal with. Even the Fire God Temple couldn't block their aura. Although I didn't know why the little zombie had come to this conclusion, I somehow chose to believe him. I felt that he wasn't lying to me. On the other hand, the little zombie was worried that the Fire God Temple wouldn't be able to protect me, but I was worried that if I went back, I would implicate Tao Wu. I used to think that Tao Wu's cultivation base was very high, but now I knew that she was just a Yin god. She wasn't a match for the heavenly masters of Mount Longhu. After understanding this, I immediately nodded to the little zombie and asked, "If we can't go to the Fire God Temple, where do you think we should go next?" The little zombie shook his head again. "No matter where we go, we have to leave this place first. I'm afraid those people will find this place soon. There's no time to lose. Let's go." After saying that, he took the lead and sped away. His speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived at the valley in the west. I wanted to stop him and find out if there were any nearby cities. Then we could rent a car. That way we could escape much faster than relying on our own bodies. However, I changed my mind. If we kept moving forward, we would eventually pass through the city area. It wouldn't be too late to rent a car then. Because of my hesitation, the distance between me and the little zombie widened. After I had chased him for around 10 minutes, I finally saw the little zombie waiting outside a cave in front of me. Seeing this, I was even more bewildered. My cultivation base was close to the glorious consciousness realm, and I was only one step away from the heavenly master realm. With the little zombie's original cultivation base, it was impossible for him to be faster than me. However, from the current situation, not only was he faster than me, but he was also much faster. It was obvious that he had been waiting for me here for a long time. I tried my best not to ask. I wanted to ask the little zombie to slow down a little to take care of my speed. However, before I could open my mouth, the little zombie raised his hand and interrupted me. He craned his neck to look behind me. He frowned as if he had found something. A few seconds later, he retracted his head and said to me, "There are people chasing after us. They're less than 20 kilometers away from us." What? Although the little zombie had reminded me several times that those people would catch up to us soon, I hadn't thought that they would be that fast. For a moment I panicked, but the little zombie was extremely calm. He grabbed my arm and instructed, "I will bring you along for a while. You just need to do your best. You don't need to worry about anything else. Do you understand?" I nodded confusedly. Before I could react, I felt a strong force on my arm, pulling my body forward at a high speed. The strong wind caused by the fast movement instantly covered my entire body. After a while, I gradually got used to it. I tried my best to circulate all the shaman energy in my body, and finally felt a little better. The little zombie was extremely fast. Even though he was carrying me, his speed was still much faster than mine. For the next hour or so, I felt like I was flying. After an hour or so, the little zombie suddenly stopped and put me on the ground. When my feet touched the ground again, I actually had a feeling of motion sickness. My body was numb, and I didn't have any strength left. After standing on the ground for a few seconds, I sat on the ground and gasped for air. On the other hand, although the little zombie was carrying someone, his expression didn't change. He was still paying attention to the movements behind us. After watching for a few minutes, he relaxed and turned to me. "Those people won't be able to catch up to us in a short time. We have half an hour to rest. After that, we will continue our journey." At this moment, I was almost out of breath. I struggled to stand up and nodded to the little zombie to show my agreement. The little zombie sat down cross-legged next to me. I waited for my breathing to stabilize and then started to adjust my breathing. Although I was exhausted, the little zombie had done most of the running. Moreover, I still had the black smoke that hadn't been completely dissolved in my body. It only took around 10 minutes for the shaman energy in my body to be replenished. After opening my eyes, I checked the time. There was still half an hour left. I thought for a while, then turned to the little zombie. He squinted his eyes and asked, "Who are you? Why did you help me along the way?" When the little zombie heard me, he opened his eyes. He turned to look at me but didn't say anything. Around 1 minute later, he took out something that looked like a stone. He asked me, "Do you remember this?" I turned around and saw the stone in his hand. It was dark brown and about the size of a fist. At first, I didn't recognize it. But after a while, I remembered that it was the stone that had appeared after the compass Zhang Kanwan had given me in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty had shattered. At that time, the stone was only as big as a grain of rice. However, after killing the evil sacrificial spirit, the stone had grown to this size. When the evil sacrificial spirit died, everyone was so happy that they didn't pay attention to where the stone had gone. How did it end up in the little zombie's hand now? I was a little skeptical. Before I could ask, I suddenly remembered that the little zombie had been staring at me for the past few days. It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through my head. I couldn't help but ask the little zombie, "Are you that evil sacrificial spirit?" I finally understood. When we left the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty, I felt that the little zombie's eyes were strangely big. They looked similar to the evil sacrificial spirits. These days, his big eyes had left a deep impression on me. At that time, I didn't think about it, and I didn't pay much attention to it. However, now that I thought about it, the little zombie was an excellent vessel. The evil sacrificial spirit hadn't died. He had used the little zombie's special body to possess him. The little zombie's face didn't change. He calmly nodded to me and said with a hoarse voice, "That's right. When you used the soul-sustaining stone to bind my soul, I didn't have the strength to get rid of it. However, this zombie suddenly picked up the soul-sustaining stone. That's how I got rid of it. Now I'm temporarily residing in his body." Sure enough, I lifted my head to look at the little zombie. I recalled the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty and the evil sacrificial spirit's ferocious appearance. I felt a little scared and retreated a little. I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask, but I couldn't. Chapter 402. Will never harm me? The evil sacrificial spirit's words stunned me. Back in Shenzhen, when the evil sacrificial spirit had touched my face, I'd felt that something was wrong. Later on, I'd agreed to go to the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum to find out the truth. Now that he'd said it himself, I understood that my feeling wasn't wrong. But why would he do that? I kept silent for a while before asking, "Who are you? Why will you never harm me?" The little zombie, or rather, the sacrificial evil spirit, raised his head. Perhaps it was because he was no longer hiding his identity. His eyes were filled with a layer of mist, and they looked almost the same as before. The only difference was that his eyes were now hidden in his eye sockets, and they looked a lot smaller. He looked at me with his large eyes and asked in a deep voice, "Who am I?" "My identity. Your previous guesses weren't wrong. I am the sacrificial spirit of the Spring Sacrifice Hall. 1,000 years ago, I was summoned from the mansion of hell and then suppressed. None of this is wrong. But besides this identity, I have another identity." Another identity? The little zombie didn't wait for me to ask and quickly continued, "My other identity involves too many secrets. I can't tell you for now." Nangong and Tao Wu both knew a lot, but they couldn't tell me for now. Now, even the evil sacrificial spirit said the same thing. I thought that he didn't know that I already knew my identity in my previous life. I immediately said, "If it involves my previous life, you can tell me. I already know that my previous life's identity is related to Emperor Ku, one of the 5 emperors. What else can't you tell me?" The little zombie turned to look at me in bewilderment. However, he quickly shook his head. "My identity is indeed related to your past life. However, it's different from what you think. Now isn't the time for you to know." Hearing that, I was instantly discouraged. I was even more confused. Although I hadn't fully understood my previous life's identity, it should be my biggest secret. Why did the evil sacrificial spirit insist on not revealing anything? I wanted to ask more questions, but the sacrificial evil spirit raised his hand and interrupted me. "We don't have much time left. Don't ask any more questions. Take a good rest. We have to depart in 5 minutes." Looking at the situation, he really didn't want to explain to me. Feeling helpless, I could only stop asking and continue to adjust my breathing according to his word. However, the shaman energy in my body had already filled up, so adjusting my breathing wouldn't be of much use. In addition, I was curious. After circulating the shaman energy in my body a few times, I stopped and continued to ask the evil sacrificial spirit, "You are very powerful. In the Yinshang royal tomb, so many heavenly masters combined weren't your match. Now, there are only 3 heavenly masters from the heavenly master sect chasing after us. Can't you defeat them? The little zombie shook his head. That day, when I fought against those heavenly masters, I was severely injured. Then, my soul was forcefully sucked out by the soul-stabilizing stone. Over the past 1,000 years, I've been cultivating that broken body. Now that I've lost my body, I don't have any power left. I can only use the yin energy in this corpse. According to your human power classification, I'm only at the glorious consciousness realm. I suddenly felt extremely guilty. I was the one who had used the soul-stabilizing stone to forcefully suck out his soul. Moreover, judging from the evil sacrificial spirit's attitude towards me, it was possible that he still had some power left. He just didn't want to attack me. That was why I almost killed him. It was said that everything was destined by God. Who would have thought that the choice I had made back then would harm me? If the evil sacrificial spirit still had his original power, I wouldn't have to worry about the 3 heavenly masters chasing after us. While I was thinking about this, the little zombie suddenly stood up from the ground. His eyes looked behind us for a while. Then, he raised his voice and shouted, "Those heavenly masters are chasing after us. Let's go." Then, he grabbed my arm. He didn't even wait for me to urge the shaman energy in my body. He directly pulled me and flew far away. After running for around 1 minute, I finally managed to urge the shaman energy in my body. Slowly, I got used to his speed. I couldn't help but criticize him. The evil sacrificial spirit had just said that the only power he could use was the yin energy in the little zombie's body, which was around the glorious consciousness realm. He was at the glorious consciousness realm, and I was also at the glorious consciousness realm. Moreover, I was at the peak of the glorious consciousness realm. Logically speaking, the shaman energy in my body should be stronger than his. However, from what I had just seen, he was stronger than me. Moreover, he was much stronger than me. This discovery puzzled me a lot. Since I had started cultivating, no matter if it was cultivation techniques or magical tools, I had always been at the top. Within the same realm, I had never met a worthy opponent. Even the genius disciples of the metaphysical families weren't as good as me. But now, the evil sacrificial spirit had completely overturned my view. I really wanted to know why it was like this. However, I couldn't ask him while running. I could only bury this question in my heart. I planned to ask him the next time I stopped to rest. This time, the running wasn't much different from the last time. After around 1 hour, the little zombie finally stopped right before the shaman energy in my body was drained. After the first time, my condition was better. I wasn't as distressed as the first time. However, I still slumped on the ground. I had to gasp for air for a few minutes before I could calm down. The little zombie didn't talk nonsense with me. Just like the last time, he asked me to restore my power. I didn't dare to linger. I sat cross-legged and used the black energy in my veins of the sky to quickly replenish my shaman energy. Around 10 minutes later, after I had replenished my shaman energy, I opened my eyes. I was a little worried. Although I had successfully avoided the pursuit of the 3 celestial masters from Longhu Mountain with the help of the little zombie, there was a time when all power was exhausted. No matter how powerful the evil sacrificial spirit was, it could only use the cultivation of the glorious consciousness realm. Moreover, even if he could endure it, I wasn't sure if I could. I had used the black energy in my veins of the sky to replenish my shaman energy. That was why I was able to recover so quickly. However, I didn't have much black energy left. If I relied on myself to replenish my shaman energy, let alone 10 minutes, I wouldn't even be able to recover my shaman energy in 1 hour. At that time, I would become a burden to the little zombie. I couldn't help but feel angry. Several hours ago, on Mount Huangguanshan, before I used the E-bead to escape, I had told the Heavenly Master from Mount Longhu everything that had happened in the imperial tomb of the Shang dynasty. However, he didn't believe me. Blaming me for the deaths of those celestial masters is already a huge injustice. Now they even want to find the lost woman from me. Longhu Mountain's way of doing things is really going too far. However, what could I do? The situation was stronger than me. Mount Longhu was too powerful. I didn't have a chance to reason with him. I could only linger at death's door to save my life. At this moment, the little zombie next to me opened his eyes. I wanted to ask him if he had some secret technique to use his glorious consciousness realm energy to exert such power. However, before I could open my mouth, the little zombie furrowed his brows. He grabbed my arm one more time. After we had flown far away, he explained to me, "Those people are coming again." While trying to move my body, I turned my head to look behind me. I didn't know if it was the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain chasing us or not. However, a few kilometers behind us, there were indeed a few people who looked like black dots dashing toward us. I ran and stopped like that for the entire night. When the next morning arrived, I didn't even know where I was. My mind was muddled, and I only knew that I was trying my best to control the shaman energy in my body to run for my life. And now, the situation that I was worried about had finally happened. There was only a thin layer of the black aura left in my veins of the heavens. It was no longer enough for me to quickly convert it into shaman chi. During the last 2 times, I hadn't recovered enough shaman chi, so I had to run away with the little zombie. Although my cultivation base had broken through the late stage of the glorious consciousness realm and reached the peak of the glorious consciousness realm, I wasn't happy at all. Chapter 403. When we stopped to rest again, I endured the pain in my body. I didn't sit down to adjust my breathing. Instead, I reached out and grabbed the little zombie's arm. While panting, I said, "We can't go on like this. They have a lot of people. Sooner or later, we will be exhausted." The little zombie still wore a sorrowful expression. He sat cross-legged on the ground and shook his head at me. "With our strength, we'll die if we turn back and fight them. We have no other choice but to run away." I turned my head to look behind me. I couldn't see the silhouettes of the people from Mount Longhu, but I could vaguely sense their auras with my spiritual sense. I estimated that they were less than 10 kilometers away from us. With the Heavenly Master's speed, 10 kilometers would only take a few minutes at most. In other words, we only had a few minutes to rest. Even if the black aura in my body was sufficient, it wouldn't be enough to replenish my magic power. If we can't replenish our shaman chi, the distance we have to run will become shorter, and our next rest time will also be shorter. If this continues, it will only be a slow suicide. When they catch up to us in the end, we won't even have the ability to fight back. I clenched my teeth. I couldn't go on like this. Even if I had to die, I had to find a way to fight against the Heavenly Masters. As I thought about this, I took out the box that contained the Xian Yuan sword and gave it to the evil sacrificial spirit. Then, I asked him, "The power contained in this thing is extremely terrifying. However, I can't use it with my current cultivation. Can you see if you can use it to fight against the enemies?" The Xian Yuan sword was extremely precious. Moreover, it was closely related to my identity. Although Nan Gong didn't specifically tell me, I knew that I couldn't easily show this sword to others. However, an external object wasn't as important as a person. As I was about to lose my life, I didn't care about anything else and took it out. Seeing the Xian Yuan sword's box, the little zombie's expression suddenly changed. After I asked, he immediately asked, "Xian Yuan sword? Why do you have the Xian Yuan sword?" It wasn't the time to explain, and I didn't open my mouth to explain. I directly handed the sword box to him and hastily asked, "Can I use it?" The little zombie didn't extend his hand to receive it. He just shook his head. "The Xian Yuan sword has great spirituality. How can an ordinary person use it?" "I can't use it, so you should put it away. If those people see it later, I'm afraid they will have another reason to kill you." Hearing him say that, my heart instantly turned to ashes. Even my strongest weapon, the Xianyuan sword, couldn't do anything. What else could I do? Fight to the death? Only when there was a glimmer of hope could it be called fighting to the death. If there was no glimmer of hope, it could only be called throwing away one's life. While I was in despair, the little zombie suddenly said, "I suddenly thought of a place. If we go there, we might be able to escape this calamity." His words were like a clear spring that flowed into my body. I was instantly energized. I quickly asked him, "Where?" The evil sacrificial spirit said, "From this corpse's memory, I know that he was born in a place with thick Yin energy. I cultivate Yin energy. Although I can only use a small part of my power, as long as there is enough Yin energy for me to absorb, I will be able to recover my cultivation base in 1 month. Even if I only have a few days, I am confident that I can restore my cultivation base to that of a heavenly master. At that time, those people who are chasing after us won't be a problem. The only problem now is that this corpse ghost hasn't developed any spirituality yet. His memory is also very chaotic. I don't know where he was born. The place where the little zombie was born? I know where he was born. I hurried to tell the evil sacrificial spirit, "I know where he was born. And I've been there before." The worried expression on the evil spirit's face eased a little. He nodded and said, "All right, take me there. As long as we can hold on until we get there, I'll take care of the rest." After running for the whole night, I finally saw a ray of hope. I excitedly stood up and looked around. I suddenly remembered that I had been running for the whole night and didn't even know where I was. I also didn't know how far I was from the corpse insect. Although the evil sacrificial spirit had thought of a way, it was hard to say whether it would work or not. Fortunately, feng shui masters were very sensitive to geographical locations. After roughly looking around, I quickly recognized that this place was the junction of Hunan, Shaanxi, and Shaanxi provinces. Yesterday, I was teleported from Kaifeng to a place several hundred li southwest. After that, the little zombie and I fled to the northwest, so it was normal for us to be here. After understanding this, I became even happier. The corpse sect was in Shaanxi province, and it was in the southern part of Shaanxi province, which was very close to where I was at this time. After making a rough estimation, I pointed to the northeast and told the little zombie, "That place is about 10 kilometers northeast from us." The little zombie's spirit was lifted. He urged me to immediately sit down and adjust my breathing. I wanted to recover as much as I could. After seeing a glimmer of hope, I didn't want to die anymore. I quickly sat down and continued to adjust my breathing. Around 5 minutes later, my spirit energy hadn't even recovered by half. The little zombie grabbed me again and continued to run like crazy. However, this time we changed our direction and headed northeast. This time, it was almost the same as before. At first, I almost completely relied on the little zombie to escape. Because of me, his speed was much slower than before. However, perhaps it was because we had changed our direction this time, but the heavenly master who was chasing us was left far behind. The next time we stopped to adjust our breathing, we had a longer time to rest. Relying on this opportunity, the little zombie and I were able to take a breather. Finally, we managed to reach the foothills of Taihang Mountain. The corpse sect was hidden in the depths of Taihang Mountain. The two of us had to use the 800 miles of Taihang Mountain to hide. We had to use the last wisp of energy in our bodies to reach the mountain area where the corpse sect was located. Although I had made it, I had almost collapsed during the last part of the journey. If it weren't for the Xian Yin fluid that the red shadow had given me, I wouldn't have been able to endure it. Even so, I had used up all the power in my body during the last part of the journey. I had to use my life force to keep going. I had to hit my chest as hard as I could. The evil sacrificial spirit was even worse off. Not only had he used up all the yin qi in the little zombie's body, but he had also used a secret technique to convert the little zombie's body into yin qi for his own use. That was how he had managed to hold on. When I saw the exit of the secret passage that Yen Nantian and I had used to escape from the corpse sect, my body went soft. I couldn't endure it anymore and directly fell to the ground. At this moment, I didn't even have the strength to open my mouth to breathe. My chest heaved up and down as I tried to take a few more breaths. However, I couldn't open my mouth. The little zombie's situation was even worse than mine. He had to take care of me along the way. At this moment, he was also lying on the ground, completely unconscious. There was not a single part of his body that wasn't covered in scars left behind by the evil sacrificial spirit's secret technique. I lay motionless on the ground for a few minutes. When I could move my arm, I clenched my teeth and punched myself in the chest. I spat out a mouthful of blood. My body regained some strength, but I still couldn't stand up. I didn't want to stand up anymore. I crawled on all fours and opened the secret passage that Yen Nantian had left behind. After the passage was opened, I had used up all of my energy. However, there was only one step left. I gritted my teeth and endured the dizziness in my head and the pain in my body. I crawled back and pulled the little zombie's body. At the same time, I took one step at a time to rest and move him into the cave. Chapter 404. When I woke up, my entire body was sore and swollen. I couldn't even open my eyes. I had tried my best, but I could only open them a little bit. Through this little bit, I could see the darkness around me. I felt a little relieved. It didn't matter if it was day or night in the Yin energy passage of the corpse sect. If the celestial master of Mount Longhu had caught up with me, he wouldn't stay in a dark place. From this, the plan I had with the little zombie had worked. The people of the Celestial Master sect hadn't caught me yet. At this moment, my body was still very tired. After relaxing a little bit, I couldn't stand it anymore and fell asleep. I didn't know how long I had slept. When I regained consciousness, I opened my eyes. However, as soon as I opened my eyes, I found that my body was moving. Moreover, someone was dragging me on the ground. I was scared and woke up. I struggled to get up. However, as soon as I moved, I heard the voice of the evil sacrificial spirit not far from me. "You're seriously injured. Don't move." After hearing his voice, I calmed down and didn't move. I turned my head to look around and found that the little zombie was dragging me forward. Moreover, in the darkness, I could vaguely tell that I was in the Yin energy passage of the corpse sect. I could finally relax. It seemed the people of the Celestial Master sect hadn't captured me. The little zombie had woken up first and was taking me to the depths of the Yin energy passage. The evil sacrificial spirit was right. My body wasn't in a good condition. I simply let him drag me forward. At the same time I asked him, "How are you? Can you absorb the Yin energy in this place?" The evil sacrificial spirit answered in a muffled voice, "I can absorb it, but the quality of the Yin energy here isn't good enough. I can feel that the Yin energy ahead of us is even thicker. Moreover, you have the blood marks on your body. It's not safe to stay at the entrance of the cave. That's why I'm dragging you forward." His deduction was correct. I had walked through this passage from the beginning to the end. Of course, I knew that the quality of the Yin energy was thicker the further I went. Moreover, the Yin energy here was divided into 4 levels: heaven, earth, black, and yellow. The Yin Qi around the Tai Sui's corpse in the innermost area was heaven-level Yin Qi, and its power was the most terrifying. If the sacrificial evil spirit absorbed that Yin Qi, its recovery speed would definitely be the fastest. I told the evil sacrificial spirit what I knew. After listening to me, he nodded. "I remember something. But the Tai Sui you mentioned, is it a living Tai Sui?" His question surprised me. A living Tai Sui? Regarding the Tai Sui, when I first met Goldie and the corpse of Heavenly Law in the Yin passage, I didn't know anything about it. Later on, I understood the nature of the competition between witchcraft and witchcraft. After I learned about the ancient legends, I had a new understanding of the Tai Sui. I roughly understood the nature of the power at the beginning of time. However, there is one question that I am still confused about, and that is the question that the evil spirit is asking. Living Tai Sui and dead Tai Sui. At first, I thought that Little Gold was the only living Tai Sui, and the rest were just the corpses of dead Tai Sui. I was pretty sure about this, and what I saw and heard basically matched my speculation. However, there was one Tai Sui that I wasn't sure about. It was the corpse of the corpse in sex Tai Sui. The first time I saw it, Yen Nantian told me that it was the corpse of heavenly law. The meaning of the word heavenly law was too broad. I didn't know what Yen Nantian meant by heavenly law. However, no matter what, it proved that it was just a corpse. Moreover, from the purple plants that covered its body and the yin qi that it emitted, it was indeed the corpse of the Tai Sui. But strangely, after I helped Yen Nantian obtain the so-called heavenly Tao blood from his body, that enormous and terrifying corpse actually moved and even attacked the two of us. At that time, I didn't think much about it. I thought that it was just because the corpse of heavenly law was magical. But now, it proved that the Tai Sui wasn't a corpse but a living creature. The people of the corpse yin sect had used some secret technique to imprison it. They had taken its energy and turned it into yin qi for the corpse yin sect to absorb. Of course, it was just my speculation. I didn't know the details yet. However, if my speculation was correct, how terrifying would this living Tai Sui be? The Tai Sui was the power of primal chaos. It was a strange life form that was projected to the world of mortals. From the power that Little Gold had when he transformed, I could tell how strong a living Tai Sui was. I originally planned to come back to the corpse sect, and now that I'm here, I've fulfilled my wish. Of course, my purpose here was just to explore the secrets of the Tai Sui. I didn't have much ambition, and I didn't expect to keep the Tai Sui with me like I did with Little Gold. After thinking about it for a while, I told the evil sacrificial spirit, I don't know if this Tai Sui is a living creature or not. However, the last time I saw it, I cooperated with another person to take a drop of blood from the Tai Sui. According to that person, the Tai Sui's blood was the blood of heavenly law. After taking a drop of blood, the Tai Sui seemed to come to life and attacked me and that person. However, the Tai Sui seemed to be bound by something and didn't hurt us. After I escaped, I never saw the Tai Sui again. Just as I said that, the evil sacrificial spirit's footsteps suddenly stopped. He cried out in surprise, Heaven's blood! Where is that drop of blood now? Is it on you? His actions stunned me. I hurriedly shook my head and immediately replied, It's not on me. After I took it off, that person took it away. You've met that person before. He's the one who helped me escape from you at the man-made dragon vein. That young god celestial master? Yes. I nodded and then curiously asked, What is the blood of heavenly law? Is it very important? The impatient expression on the evil sacrificial spirit's face eased a little. He shook his head and said, It's not important, but it's very helpful to you. If you have the chance to see that person again, you must find a way to get the whereabouts of the blood of heavenly law from him. I felt strange and asked, He took the blood of heavenly law from the previous Tai Sui. If that thing is really powerful, why don't we take another drop from that Tai Sui? The evil sacrificial spirit shook his head again. Each Tai Sui only has one drop of the blood of heavenly law. It's impossible to take a second drop. I felt even more strange. I wanted to ask more, but the evil sacrificial spirit's face suddenly changed. He raised his hand and interrupted me. I didn't have time to react. Soon, the evil sacrificial spirit lowered his voice and frowned. Those people are really persistent. I think the Een energy in this place isn't strong enough to suppress the blood mark on your body. Wait until my cultivation base recovers a little bit. Then, I will be able to help you cover it. At that time, those people won't be able to find you. It turned out that the people from the Celestial Master sect had chased after me again. My mind that had calmed down was stirred up again. I didn't even have time to feel resentful when I was running for my life. But now that I recalled how I had risked my life to escape, I couldn't suppress the resentment in my heart anymore. If the Liu family wanted to kill me, it wouldn't have mattered. The Liu family and I had an irreconcilable grudge. The Liu family had killed my parents, and I had killed Liu Ziang. We wouldn't stop until one of us was dead. No matter who killed the other, I couldn't say anything. However, the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain were different. I had no grudge against them, but they didn't distinguish right from wrong. They accused me of killing the Celestial Masters. No matter how hard I tried to explain, they didn't believe me. They even wanted to find the whereabouts of the mysterious woman. Just because my cultivation wasn't high and I didn't have a strong background, did they want to bully me? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.